Chapter 151. After hearing Rinpoche's words, the empress nodded her head and said, "All right, I will get someone to send the herbs to you tomorrow morning. After you are done with your training, come and find me. I will bring you to the palace treasury to get some things." Rinpoche felt a little awkward when he heard this. Using the empress's wealth to buy things on earth, he suddenly felt that he was living off a woman. Unfortunately, it would take a long time before he could get his income from earth. He had to spend a lot of time and energy to make all kinds of things to earn money. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would really be living off a woman. However, when he thought about the martial arts and herbs provided by the empress, it seemed that he was destined to live off a woman. "What are you thinking about?" the empress asked when she saw that he was silent. "I just feel that I am living off a woman," Rinpoche said awkwardly. Then, facing the empress's probing gaze, he explained the meaning of living off a woman. "Why, don't you want to eat?" The empress's beautiful eyes wandered and her voice carried a trace of a different meaning. Rinpoche's heart trembled when he saw this. "Just treat it as buying it for me," the empress continued. "I know." Rinpoche nodded his head. The empress was always so cold. When she occasionally looked at him with a gentle and charming gaze, it was as if a fairy had turned into an ordinary person. It was exceptionally captivating. After accompanying the empress for a while, Rinpoche got up and left. Qing Yuan and Hong Luan saw him coming out from outside and entered Yangshin Palace Hall. After Rinpoche left, the empress reverted to her original appearance. She just felt that the palace was exceptionally cold. Early the next morning, 5 or 6 people came in carrying bundles of paper bags and placed them in another room in Pingle Park. Soon after, they began to fetch water to start a fire and made a large tub of medicinal water. "Storyteller Ren, you need to cultivate in this medicinal bath to absorb the medicinal power," a woman around 30 years old said to Rinpoche. Rinpoche nodded his head. He had already understood all these from Rui visualization. Everyone first added the medicinal herbs into the tub and then boiled the water. The water immediately turned into a strange dark green color. After the water temperature dropped, they continued to use a small fire to maintain the temperature. Rinpoche stared at the strange dark green liquid for a long time before putting on his shorts and stepping into it. "It's so hot." Rinpoche sucked in a breath of cold air. The temperature was at least 40 degrees Celsius. Stepping in like this caused his entire body to turn red, and he felt as if he was being cooked. The crackling of the firewood under the barrel made him feel like he was stewing a pot of soup. However, he quickly cleared away the distracting thoughts in his mind and started to visualize the visualization of water. After a while, Rinpoche opened his eyes helplessly and said to the people around him, "I'll have to trouble the few of you to go outside the courtyard. I'm not used to all of you standing here. I'm afraid of strangers. You can come in later." After they left, he closed his eyes and started to visualize again. Even though there was still the sound of burning firewood, it didn't affect him much. It was still filled with a faint mist, and he couldn't see far into the distance. Only the lake and a few trees seemed to exist. Rinpoche walked into the lake. When he started to swim forward, he started to realize that something was wrong. The surrounding water started to form waves. Even though it wasn't big, it was more exhausting than the stagnant water he used to swim in. Moreover, there were traces of dark green things in the water that looked like aquatic plants that wrapped around his body. It was as if he was carrying a heavy object on his back and swam even slower. It took him a longer time to swim to the center of the lake. Then, he tried his best to dive down. This time, he woke up from exhaustion before he could reach his previous position. Rinpoche shook his head. He was still mentally exhausted and his body was swollen in pain. When he looked down at the medicinal bath below him, the color had become much lighter. It seemed like the medicinal efficacy had been absorbed into his body. The medicinal efficacy of this medicinal bath would take at least a week to be digested and gradually change his body. Rinpoche returned to his bed to rest for a while before looking for the empress. However, the empress hadn't come down from the court session yet, so he waited outside Yangshin Palace Hall. After a long time, Rinpoche heard voices from afar and knew that the empress had returned. "All of you can leave. You don't have to follow me." The empress waved her hand at the people behind her. After everyone left, she said to Ren Baqian, "Follow me." The inner treasury of the palace was located in a rather secretive place in the palace. It was completely made of stone and didn't have any windows. After the thick metal door was opened, the imperial bodyguard passed the torch to the both of them and left. Ren Baqian held the torch and followed the empress. Under the empress's guidance, they lit up the braziers in the inner treasury. At this moment, the inner treasury was lit up. This place was smaller than what Ren Baqian had imagined. It was divided into 2 levels. On one level, there were many shelves with swords, weapons, and armors. On the surrounding walls, there were boxes of gold, silver, jewelry, and the like. These were all gifts from the empress during her birthday celebration. Most of them were gold and silver. Only a few small boxes contained jewelry. On the second level, there were many cubicles and shelves. There were a lot fewer items. Ren Baqian walked around the inner treasury. They were all rare and precious treasures. Their value was indeed very high. Many of them couldn't be found on Earth. Such rare items might be able to be sold for a good price on Earth, but it was too difficult to sell them. He was just an ordinary person and didn't have the means to sell these items. "Your Majesty, let's go back to the first level. Even though the items here are very valuable, it's difficult to sell them," Ren Baqian told the empress honestly. "All right." On the first level, Ren Baqian finally chose a few pieces of jade pendants, jade talismans, rubies, and emeralds before stopping. "Take a few more." "I keep these items with me," the empress said to Ren Baqian. "I'll take these first. It's inconvenient to carry too many with me. This time around, I want to test how many days I can stay here. It's very likely that I'll be sent back suddenly. Therefore, I can carry these items with me at all times," Ren Baqian said. In the palace of the capital of Great Xia, a dignified-looking old man sat on a chair. 6 people were kneeling before him. "Who is it? How dare they assassinate the prince?" The old man was the current emperor of Great Xia. At this moment, his face was filled with uncontrollable anger. The prince of Great Xia was assassinated? How many years had it been since this had happened? They were simply audacious to the extreme and treated the royal family of Great Xia as nothing. "Your Majesty, the 7th prince arrived at Kaiping 5 days ago. He stayed for a night before setting off. 3 days ago, he was assassinated in Wulong Valley." Among the 7th prince's entourage, there were 95 people at the intermediate level of the human realm, 5 people at the advanced level of the human realm, 1 person at the intermediate level of the earth realm, and 2 consecrated people at the earth embryo realm. None of them survived. In addition, a caravan that was returning from Dayo was also assassinated. None of them survived. Presumably, it was because they saw the murderer. To be able to kill all of the 7th prince's entourage, this kind of strength wasn't something an ordinary person could achieve. Even though the scene had been cleaned up, there were still some traces left behind. According to the investigators at the scene, it was suspected to be the Aboriginals. However, I don't have any clearer evidence to prove it. I also didn't find any reason for Qi Zixiao or Hong Wu to attack the 7th prince. I want them to pay the price. Chapter 152. The Great Xia dynasty's Lian family, as a second-rate aristocratic family in Great Xia, was considered the #1 family in the Zhejiang prefecture. No matter what time it was, the entrance would always be bustling with activity. However, for the past 2 days, no one could be seen outside the door. The entire Lian family was covered in dark clouds. The family head's favorite son went to Dayo to celebrate the empress's birthday. In the end, he was eaten by wild beasts, and even his bones couldn't be found. This matter had already spread throughout Zhejiang prefecture. Some people said it was retribution, while others laughed at the fact that the Lian family could only swallow this loss. The Lian family was tyrannical in Zhejiang prefecture, but did he dare to seek revenge in Dayo? Revenge on who? If one were to talk about revenge, the target could only be Dayo's Qi Zixiao, the 7th most powerful expert in the world. After all, Lian Baocheng, that good-for-nothing, must have a screw loose in his head to see how beautiful the Empress of Dayo was. This result caused many people to rejoice in his misfortune. The Lien family had been too overbearing these past few years, and there were many people who didn't like them. Lien Qiji sat in the main hall and listened to the reports from his subordinates. The families of those people have been dealt with. Don't you think I'm cruel? Lien Qiji sighed. How could that be? After the death of the young master, that group of people actually dared to escape. If it wasn't for the fact that someone with a guilty conscience came back, I'm afraid the entire Lien family would still be in the dark, said the middle-aged man below. Lien Qiji knocked on the table with his fingers. Although that group of people ran away, they couldn't run away. He had already sent people to investigate. He had to catch all of them and wouldn't let them die a quick death. As for their family members in Zhejiang Prefecture, he had already sent them on their way. But he still couldn't swallow this anger in his heart. His son and Tong Tong were eaten by wild beasts? His son had no sense of propriety, but did Tong Tong also have no sense of propriety? Qi Zixiao had gone too far. He couldn't afford to offend Qi Zixiao, but there was another person he could take revenge on. You killed my son, I'll kill your pretty boy. Over the past few days, as the news spread, the news that Qi Zixiao had found a pretty boy who only knew how to flatter her had spread like wildfire. At the same time, there was also a sentence that spread. If the heavens did not give birth to His Majesty, the ages would be like a long night. It was said that the pretty boy won Qi Zixiao's heart because of this sentence. This news didn't shock the world, but at least some well-informed people were shocked. Many people were envious of that pretty boy. Not only was Qi Zixiao the Empress of Deyo, but she was also extremely talented and the 7th most powerful expert in the world. To be fancied by such a woman, that brat must have accumulated several lifetimes of good fortune. The True Tao sect was a small sect that not many people knew about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, a person rose to prominence and became known to the whole world. Senior sister, that Qi Zixiao is really arrogant. He even dared to accept such words. He really doesn't care about the heroes of the world. A 16 or 17-year-old girl in the audience who was dressed like a Taoist nun wrinkled her nose and said angrily. In front of her was a peerlessly beautiful woman who was also dressed like a Taoist nun. She wore a tall crown on her head and a headband on her forehead. At this moment, the woman was looking at him with a smile. Senior sister, you're always like this. You don't care about anything, the young girl said angrily. That's all there is to the world. What's there to fight about? The woman smiled. You're the 3rd most powerful expert in the world. If I were as capable as you, I would have taught her a lesson long ago. She's merely the 7th most powerful expert in the world, yet she's so arrogant. I'm angry for you, but why aren't you reacting at all? The young girl said angrily as she slammed the table. If you weren't so impatient, you would definitely be much stronger than you are now. Have you done your homework today? The woman's smile was calm and full of indifference and modesty. Anyone who saw her would know that she was the 3rd most powerful expert in the world, Li Yuanzhu. The young girl was so angry that she snorted twice. After a while, she hung her head dejectedly. You're almost like a statue of a god. After a short while, she rolled her eyes and was overjoyed. I heard that Qi Zixiao found a pretty boy who doesn't know any martial arts and only knows how to flatter. It's so ridiculous that he was actually tricked by just one sentence. Even I wouldn't be that stupid. Li Yuanzhu smiled and looked at the young girl. After a while, she said, that's not necessarily true. No one knew if she was saying that she wouldn't be that stupid or if she had other meanings. Ren Baqian naturally didn't know what his reputation had become after the departure of those people and the coming and going of the merchant caravans. Even if he knew, there was nothing he could do. In fact, not only did the outside world think so, but the entire imperial court and the ordinary aboriginal people also thought so. However, Her Majesty was insistent and extremely kind, so everyone had no choice but to accept it. After persevering in his training for the past few days, Rinpoche felt that his physique seemed to have improved a lot. At the very least, it was harder for him to get tired, and his strength had also increased. Originally, he only had 120 kilograms of strength, but now, he had 135 kilograms of strength. In just a few days, his strength had increased so much, which surprised him quite a bit. The effect of the medicinal bath was actually so great. Previously, he didn't make much progress during his training, but these few days, he had made rapid progress. It was no wonder that this martial art technique required supplementary medicine. Now, he could even dive from 15 meters to 17 meters in the lake. Although he still couldn't see the bottom of the lake, this speed of progress made him happy. However, he didn't know how expensive the medicine he was using was. If it was given to ordinary Aboriginal people, perhaps 10 of them would be able to increase their strength by 20 kilograms. These few days, he had also changed his training schedule to nighttime. After training, he could immediately go to bed and rest. This way, he wouldn't have to lie down and rest for half a day after training. On this day, when he woke up, before he could even wash his face, he felt his surroundings suddenly change. From his room in Pingle Park, he had returned to the living room of his house on Earth. Originally, he was still a little muddle-headed, but he instantly sobered up. Counting the time, it had been 5 days this time. Originally, he transmigrated once every 3 days. Now, he transmigrated once every 2.5 to 5 days. Furthermore, he could choose the time. Such a change made him very happy. At least, his degree of freedom had increased a lot. He could come back when he had free time. This way, there wouldn't be any delays. After all, if it was like before, it was very easy for something to happen and he would suddenly be absent. After his joy, he noticed that there were a few bags placed at the side. These were all things that he had bought for the Empress previously, but he didn't bring them back. This time, when he returned, he just happened to bring them along, as well as the hot pot and various kinds of hot pot ingredients that the Empress couldn't forget. The beef and mutton in that world were much more delicious, and it couldn't be better to use in hot pot. Thinking about how he and the Empress could sit in Yangshin Palace Hall and eat hot pot, this kind of life seemed pretty good. It was a pity that he had to prepare to set off after he returned. He walked alone in the room. The Empress was here with him, and the scene of him cooking while the Empress sat on the sofa and watched television was still fresh in his mind. All of a sudden, Rinpoche felt like buying this house and leaving that scene here forever. Chapter 153. The window and door on the second floor were still broken, and they hadn't been dealt with yet. They were only sealed with bedding. Previously, when the Empress was here, he didn't have time to deal with this matter. Now it was time to deal with it. Rinpoche changed his clothes, considered for a while, and decided to erase all the surveillance data. Then, he took out the hard drive and destroyed it, preparing to find a place to throw it into the river. Fortunately, his parents didn't call the police last time. Otherwise, these surveillance cameras would be in big trouble. At present, Rinpoche was no longer in a hurry to investigate the reason for his transmigration. In any case, he couldn't find the reason now. He would see if he could find the reason after he became stronger. That day, the Empress suddenly appeared in front of him and pulled him back at the moment of his transmigration. It could be seen that someone as powerful as the Empress would be able to detect his transmigration. Once his strength reached that level, he might be able to sense it more clearly. He just didn't know if that day would come. He went out to apply for a new SIM card and then bought 2 mobile phones. The other one was prepared for the Empress. The next time she came to this world, it should be useful. Otherwise, it would be terrible if he lost her one day. In fact, on the 3rd day that the Empress was here, Rinpoche brought her to the shopping mall and went to the washroom. When he came out and realized that the Empress was gone, his heart almost stopped beating. Fortunately, it was just a false alarm. The Empress was in a shop nearby. However, this incident reminded him of something. If she came again in the future, Rinpoche couldn't possibly find a rope to tie the Empress around her waist. After setting up the SIM card and phone, Rinpoche gave his family a call. At least he still remembered his parents' phone number. He would use WeChat to contact Chinching later. It did not matter if he could not find the others. After all, he did not have much contact with them. Hello, Dad. Sigh, no matter what, Dad will support you no matter who you find. Although Rinpoche was speechless after listening to his father's words, he felt warmth in his heart. As long as you don't bring a man back. Pooh! Ren spat out a mouthful of blood. It had already been half a month. Why was she still playing this joke? I just said it casually last time. Just don't let Mom rush me. That's why it's so scary, Dad muttered. Your father, almost had a heart attack because of you. But that girl from last time, when are you going to bring her back to meet me? After Rinpoche informed his family that he was safe, the next step was to estimate the value of the jade talismans, jade pendants, and gemstones that he had brought back and find a place to sell them. Sitting in the car, he searched the internet on his phone for a long time before realizing that it was much more troublesome than he had imagined. Since he did not have a certificate of origin, large organizations and legitimate companies would not accept him. Some people had their own channels and did not need to consider this aspect, but in his hands, it was no different from holding stolen goods, except that there was no owner. Then there were some small companies, but it was hard to say how much these things would be worth if they were in front of them. After searching on the internet for a long time, he found all kinds of messy information, but not much of it was valuable. Rinpoche closed the webpage. After thinking about it, he was afraid that he would have to look for Qin. At the very least, with his status and connections, he might be able to find a way to help. He sent a message to Qin, and not long after, Qin gave him a call. Yo, 8,000-year-old didn't go to Wing together. Why did you think of me today? Let's have lunch, Rinpoche said. The law firm has been very busy recently. They're working on a case. Let's meet downstairs at the law firm later. There is a restaurant that is not bad. Give me a call when you arrive. Rinpoche could hear the sound of typing coming from the other end of the phone. All right. An hour later, Rinpoche arrived at the law firm where Qin worked and gave him a call. 5 minutes later, he saw Qin jogging down the road, opening the car door and sitting in the front passenger seat. So busy recently? It's really rare to see young Master Chen like this. I can't help it. People who are getting married have to support their families. Rinpoche looked at him with disdain. His annual salary was not even enough to cover his monthly expenses. Don't you feel guilty for saying this? If you really want to support your family, you can just go back and take over your father's business. Why are you looking for me? Qin asked. Let's talk when we reach the restaurant. After a while, both of them sat in a private room of the restaurant. Rinpoche took out 2 red and 3 green gems from a cloth bag and placed them on the table. Help me see if there is any way to sell them. Where did you get them from? Are they stolen goods? Or did you rob tombs in the mountains a few days ago? Don't forget that I'm a lawyer. Qin looked at the gems on the table and was not in a hurry to look at them. Instead, he joked. Clean stuff. It's just that I can't tell you where I got them from, so I have to look for you. After hearing what he said, Qin held the gems in his hands and looked at them carefully. The 2 rubies were the size of a thumbnail. Furthermore, it was obvious that they had been polished. The color was deep red, like a ball of flame. Looking at them against the sunlight, the interior was extremely clean. There were only a few cracks on the edges. The 2 rubies were about the same size, and their purity was also very close. As for the emerald, it was emitting a deep green color. Its purity was also very good, but it was slightly inferior to the 2 rubies. I don't really understand these things, but I have seen a few of them in the past. The price of these gems should not be low. I can help you contact someone to sell them, but I can't tell you the source. The other party might want to lower the price, Qin said as he placed the gems in front of Rinpoche. Understood. Rinpoche nodded. He didn't even think about selling them at the market price. As long as he could sell them at a similar price, it would be fine. Qin saw that Rinpoche understood, and that made things easier. He made a phone call and chatted for a while. Then he said, Fatty Sue, one of my brothers has a few gems that he wants to sell. Come over and take a look. After that, he told Rinpoche the address and hung up the phone. Keep them first. We will talk about it when Fatty Sue is here, Qin said to Rinpoche. While the 2 of them were waiting, Qin hesitated for a while and said to Rinpoche, I saw you with a woman the last time. Rinpoche immediately looked at him from the corner of his eyes. Don't tell me you are waiting for me to go out in the neighborhood? That's not important. Chen Qing waved his hand and said to him seriously, "That woman is indeed beautiful. Her family background should not be ordinary. With one look, I can tell that she is not someone that can be raised by a small family. Not to mention a small family, even an ordinary official's family would not be able to raise her. Only those big shots can. You can be considered to be successful. Let's not talk about other things. When the medicine hits the market, you will definitely be worth hundreds of millions. But in the eyes of some people, you are no different from an ordinary person. What I mean by this is that in our country, people of equal social status are still very important. Your status is too different from hers. You might be fated to be together for a period of time, but don't fall too deeply into it." "Thank you," Rinpoche said. Although Chen Qing's words were not pleasant to hear, for him to say these words to Rinpoche meant that he really treated Rinpoche as a friend. Rinpoche had to admit that Chen Qing's eyes were indeed very sharp. He could actually see so much just by looking at Rinpoche from afar. Chapter 154. The fatty Su that Chen Qing mentioned did not make the two of them wait for too long. He was about 25 or 26 years old and wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. He looked refined if not for his physique. His initial estimate was that he was at least 100 kilograms. His muscles trembled with every step he took. "Hello, hello. You must be young Master Chen's friend. You can just call me Fatty Su." Fatty Su took off his glasses and scanned the room. Then, he shook hands with Rinpoche and said, "I'm Rinpoche." Rinpoche introduced himself. "Oh, 8,000 years old? In ancient times, you would be a prince. You're amazing." Fatty Su laughed out loud. He was tactful and enthusiastic, but not annoying. Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. He might really become a prince consort. Who did father get to come up with the name? Tai Zi, it's rare for you to think of me when something good happens. Fatty Su patted Chen Qing's shoulder and sat down on a chair. Soon after, he seemed to feel a little uncomfortable and pulled another chair together. Only then did he sit down steadily and began to wipe the mist off his spectacles. "Isn't it a good thing that I'm married? When the time comes, I'll definitely ask you to send a gift." Chen Qing also laughed. "This is necessary. Have you decided on a date?" Rinpoche turned around and asked Chen Qing. Previously, it was the engagement banquet. He was not sure if Chen Qing and Jiang Nan were engaged for the wedding banquet. "May 1st next year. Even if you didn't ask me, I would have informed you by then," Chen Qing said. After chatting for a while, Chen Qing said to Fatty Su, "This brother of mine has something to sell. It's clean, but there aren't any procedures. Take a look. If you can accept it, then accept it. If you can't, then find a way. We're brothers, don't act like you're trying to fool an outsider." "Don't worry. It won't be a problem. Let's make friends." Fatty Su immediately patted his chest. His family owns the Su Ji Jewelry Company. They are very knowledgeable about this industry, Chen Qing explained. Shuji Jewelry was one of the largest jewelry stores in the city. There were 6 stores in the city alone, and there were also stores in the surrounding provinces and cities. It could be considered to be quite famous. Rinpoche placed a few gemstones on the round table and said, "Sorry to trouble you." Fatty Su turned the table, and a few gemstones appeared in front of him. Then he took out a white cloth, tweezers, gloves, magnifying glass, and a filter from his bag and placed them on the table one by one. After that, he put on the gloves and placed the gemstones on the white cloth one by one, carefully examining them. While he was inspecting the items, Rinpoche and Chen Qing were waiting there. Rinpoche did not know what the items that he had brought back were like. Even though the items that could be given to the Empress would not be bad, after all, the other world was still somewhat different from this world. He wouldn't be surprised if something went wrong. During the examination, Fatty Su had a serious expression on his face. He did not utter a single word. After a long time, he finally placed the 5 gemstones back onto the cloth. After taking off his gloves, he wiped off his sweat and smiled at the two of them. There shouldn't be any problems with these gemstones. Furthermore, they are natural and did not undergo heat treatment. However, I still need to take it back and re-examine it. After all, The things I brought with me are quite simple and crude. Brother Ren wants to make a move, right? Is it clean? It's very clean. It was passed down by an old man. There's nothing wrong with it. It would be best if that's the case, Fatty Sue said while wiping the sweat off his forehead. Brother Ren, if you want to send it to an auction house, I can help you with the appraisal procedures. If you want to cash it, the price might be lower than the market price. After all, with such a large flow of funds, I can't possibly do you a favor or I won't be able to explain myself, Fatty Sue continued. Cash it. All right then, I'll go back and examine it further before deciding. Fatty, don't you have any idea what's going on? Chin Ching asked. Even though these two rubies aren't pigeon blood, they are still deep red in color and have a very high purity. Most importantly, they are natural and have not been heated. As for these 3 rubies, they are emeralds. The color and luster are also pretty good. If I didn't make a mistake, a conservative estimate of the value of these items is more than 20 million yuan. I still need to re-examine them before I can be sure. It's not that I don't trust you, Brother Ren. It's just that it's really hard to predict when it comes to gemstones. It's hard to avoid misjudging them. A slight difference in quality is a huge difference. Fatty Sue laughed mischievously. Ren Baqian kept the gemstones. Following which, the 3 of them ate and chatted. Fatty Sue didn't ask Ren Baqian about the origin of these gemstones. He had already made it clear previously, so there was no need to ask again. During the meal, Chin Ching took the initiative to bring up the matter regarding the pharmaceutical laboratory. Now that the laboratory equipment and personnel had arrived and those seeds were being cultivated, all that was left was to wait and see how long it would take for the results to be produced. At this moment, Chin Ching brought up this matter. On one hand, Ren Baqian had been elusive lately. On the other hand, he wanted to let Fatty Sue know. Being able to do business with Chin Ching's family would at least make Fatty Sue think highly of him. This would also save Ren Baqian a lot of trouble. After the meal, Ren Baqian sent Chin Ching back to the law firm. After which, he and Fatty Sue went to the largest jewelry store in the city, Suji Jewelry. After sending the gemstones in for an entire afternoon, they finally waited for the results of the final examination. Fatty Sue looked at the report in his hands and said to Ren Baqian, Brother Ren, if these items were to be sent to the auction house, they should be worth more than 30 million yuan. The highest price would be 33 million yuan. If there are 2 people who are interested in them at the same time, the bidding price might be even higher. However, I can only offer 25 million yuan. This is already the best I can do. After all, there are still a lot of things to do. These items need to be sent to a bigger auction house, and I'm afraid it will take a few months. With such a huge amount of money, there has to be an explanation. Art, thank you. Ren Baqian nodded his head slightly. It was much better than what he had expected. Even though it seemed like Fatty Sue had made a lot of money, if he were to find a random place to sell them, it was possible that someone would offer him 3 million yuan. Next, it was time to sign the agreement. When Ren Baqian left, there was already an additional 25 million yuan in his bank account. As for the few pieces of jade pendants and talismans, Ren Baqian took them out to let Fatty Sue take a look. The jade was good, but it didn't have much historical value. The price was also not high. It was about a few million yuan. If it was in the past, it would be a huge sum of money. However, with 25 million yuan in his bank account, there was no need to rush to sell it. After Ren Baqian went out, he first transferred 2 million yuan to his family. Within half an hour, he received a call from his family. The 2 million yuan shocked his parents. Why did you transfer so much money to your family? The company has been doing well recently, and I have some spare cash on hand. Use this money to buy a house for Wanyan and a car for Dad, Ren Baqian said with a smile. Hearing this, even though his parents were grumbling, they were happy that their son had grown up. After hanging up the phone, Ren Baqian looked for a skewer shop. He hadn't had skewers for a long time and was craving for food. During this period, he was also thinking about what he should do in the future. His top priority was still the iron ore, steel making and forging. If he wanted to open a mine, it would be best for him to get some explosives. Those things would definitely increase the mining speed immediately. Otherwise, he would just have to rely on those open-pit mines and use pickaxes to dig for metal ores. The mining speed would definitely not be fast. No matter what, it was definitely a good idea to prepare some explosives first. He reckoned that the aboriginals who had never seen gunpowder before would definitely be pleasantly surprised. Chapter 155. The next day, Rinpoche once again went to the place where he bought the gun. He asked for Chin Ching's phone number again. Just like before, they were blindfolded and brought in. "I want a rifle and mine explosives." After Rinpoche took off his hood, he saw the burly man from before and immediately said, "You want to rob a bank?" The burly man asked in surprise. "If we want to go up the mountain, we might have to dig a hole. I need mining explosives that are easy to operate, stable and powerful," Rinpoche said directly. "It's too risky to sell this to you," the big man said, staring at him. Previously, he didn't think much of it. However, if explosives were used, coupled with what Rinpoche said about digging holes, it immediately reminded him of a profession, grave robbers. Rinpoche couldn't help but laugh bitterly. He was the true good citizen, okay? You can pay more, and you don't have to worry about the risk if you use it deep in the mountains. I'm even more careful than you in this regard. After all, I'm not someone who lacks money. This time, I need to go into the mountains for something, and I might need to use explosives in some places. Otherwise, I wouldn't have asked for mine explosives. It would be a waste if he went in because of certain things. Rinpoche's words finally moved the other party. Those who could find their way here were all young masters and not those hooligans on the streets. "How many mine explosives do you need?" 100 kilograms, Rinpoche replied straightforwardly. The burly man pondered for a while. Mining explosives were too cheap. 1 ton only cost 3,000 yuan. Even if Rinpoche increased the price, how much could they sell for? Therefore, he looked up at Rinpoche and asked, "How about TNT? 20 kilograms is enough. It's more stable, less prone to problems, and it's easier to carry." Rinpoche was a little surprised at the boldness of this burly man. Previously, when Rinpoche wanted to buy mining explosives, he was still hesitant. In the end, he even dared to sell TNT. After all, this was China, not some foreign country. At the thought of going abroad, Rinpoche also felt that if he needed weapons and explosives again, it would be better to do so overseas. It was simply too easy for something to go wrong at home. "Sure, I want 40 kilograms. It's best if it's made into a detonator that can be ignited and detonated." Rinpoche nodded. Previously, he only asked for 100 kilograms of explosives because he wanted to bring only 60 kilograms to Dayo at a time. However, he was afraid that it would not be enough, so he prepared to bring it twice. It was still very dangerous to leave this thing at home. If TNT was used to transport it all at once, and it was more powerful, that would be the best. After the other party nodded his head, Rinpoche picked a Type 81 rifle. This type of classic rifle, which imitated the AK, had always been the most popular rifle in the country. The 7.62mm bullet could be fired at twice the speed of a handgun. Its penetrating power was much better than that of a handgun. With 30 bullets in a magazine, Rinpoche felt that he could seriously injure the saber-toothed tiger that he saw previously with this gun. If Rinpoche were to encounter a practitioner like Tong Tong who had just attained the earthwheel level, Rinpoche would be able to shoot a shuttle at him. He definitely wouldn't be able to dodge or block it. 1 gun, 3 magazines, and 500 bullets. After paying, Rinpoche was sent back to the car along with the bag containing the guns. As for the TNT explosives, they would not be traded at the other party's place. Instead, they would inform him of the location in 2 days and he would go there directly to pick them up. The money had already been paid together with the gun. For the next few days, while waiting for the explosives, Rinpoche pondered whether he should look for a place abroad. At the very least, it would be more convenient for him to buy weapons and explosives. On the 4th day, Rinpoche obtained the explosives without any delay. He immediately carried 2 big bags back to Pingle Park. This time around, he brought back the TNT explosives. Even though he could wait until he reached the mine to collect them, he didn't dare to leave them at home. In addition, there was that Type 81 rifle, bullets, magazines, the Empress's hot pot, base ingredients, dipping sauces, a pair of shoes that the Empress liked very much, and a small amount of candy. Rinpoche looked at the familiar surrounding scenery. He first put down the things, opened the window, and looked at the sky outside. It was only evening. Then, he carried the hot pot and the pair of shoes to meet the Empress. After waiting outside Yangshin Palace Hall for a while, Rinpoche entered. The Empress was still on the couch drinking wine in boredom. Rinpoche suddenly felt that he should really bring her a laptop to watch movies and animations. However, if he were to nurture the Empress into a 2D expert, he reckoned that he would be committing a grave sin. After thinking about it, it was better to abandon this thought. "Your Majesty, I'm back." As Rinpoche spoke, he went forward and opened the bag, revealing the hot pot inside. When the Empress saw the hot pot, a trace of a smile appeared on her cold face. "Not bad." She turned her head and said to Qin Yuan, "Inform the Imperial Kitchen that there's no need to prepare dinner. Just cut some thin slices of meat and vegetables, a little of each. Also, bring some charcoal and a container." Qin Yuan nodded her head in response. When she went out, she was rather curious. What was Her Majesty going to do? After which, the table was brought over and a metal plate was placed on the table. Rinpoche then placed the copper hot pot on it. At the same time, he took out the base ingredients and poured some water on it. After that, everything was ready. All that was left was the meat and charcoal. Seeing that Rinpoche was busy, the Empress opened her mouth and said, "Are we going to set off this time?" "Yes, we can set off tomorrow. After all, this is an important matter," Rinpoche said. The Empress nodded her head. It was indeed time to set off. By now, the recruitment order should have already reached the mountains. 3 months was enough to recruit 20,000 soldiers. Even though the training still needed some time, the weapons couldn't be delayed at all. After a while, Qin Yuan and the people from the Imperial Kitchen brought all kinds of things over. The Empress then waved her hand to dismiss Qin Yuan and Hong Luan. After the two of them left, the Empress rested her chin on one hand and looked at Rinpoche busying himself. She was somewhat happy. This Yangshin Palace Hall wasn't that deserted anymore. After a while, the water in the hot pot began to boil. Rinpoche first placed the meat slices in the hot pot. Just as he was about to raise his head and tell the Empress that it was time to eat, he happened to see a pair of clear and bright eyes. "Your Majesty, it's time to eat," Rinpoche said softly. At this moment, the two of them were sitting opposite each other in the huge Yangshin Palace Hall. The copper hot pot was constantly emitting hot steam and the meat slices were rolling in it. "Pour some wine for me." After Rinpoche was done, the Empress said, "Fill it up for yourself as well." After which, the Empress raised her wine cup and said, "I hope everything goes smoothly for you." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Rinpoche said as he drank the wine in one gulp. He filled up both of their wine cups. The Empress said again, "I will send a group of people to accompany you. You have to take care of yourself." Rinpoche felt warmth in his heart after hearing the Empress's concern. It seemed that after the trip to Earth, the Empress had indeed changed a lot. At the very least, when the two of them were facing each other, the Empress looked more feminine. It was as if a layer of ice-cold armor had been removed. This kind of change made him feel happy. The two of them ate the hot pot for about 2 hours. Occasionally, they would exchange a few words and drink a mouthful of wine. At other times, they would just stare at the meat slices rolling in the hot pot. They didn't need to talk much. Just by sitting opposite each other and looking at each other, they felt happy in their hearts. Chapter 156. The next day, Rinpoche woke up, washed up, and started to pack his things. After he was done preparing, he went to see the Empress. This time, the place wasn't Yangshin Palace Hall but the throne room. This was his first time here. When he arrived, the Empress was sitting on the highest golden chair. There were already a few people standing below her. "Greetings, Your Majesty." After Rinpoche greeted them, he stood obediently at the side and sized up the rest of them. One of them was a burly man wearing iron armor and holding a helmet with a feather on it. His skin was bronze in color, and he looked to be in his 30s. He was a rank 6 military official. There were two other people. One of them was in his 40s and had a big beard. He was looking at Rinpoche from head to toe. There was another person who looked to be in his 30s or 40s. Compared to the aboriginals, he was slightly skinny, but compared to Rinpoche, he was considered a burly man. The former was the official robe of the 3rd rank, while the latter was the official robe of the 5th rank. Rinpoche. The Empress's cold voice came from above. I'm here. Rinpoche promptly took a few steps forward and faced the Empress. Storyteller Rinpoche of Qingshin Palace Hall is rather talented and devoted to his duty. He was promoted to the position of Imperial Deputy Prefect. I'll take up the post immediately. Rinpoche was stunned at first. Then he knelt on one knee and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty." He was a little stunned. He had only been here for less than 2 minutes, and he was already promoted. Furthermore, it was a Deputy Imperial Deputy Prefect who was directly promoted from minor 8th rank to minor 5th rank. This speed was faster than riding a rocket. It had been less than 3 months since Rinpoche arrived in this world, but he had already walked the path that others would take a lifetime to walk. It was very difficult for ordinary officials and generals to be promoted so quickly, no matter how great their contributions were. However, the other 3 were not surprised. After all, everyone knew his identity. If there were no accidents, he would become a prince in the future. His current official position was just a transition. Moreover, His Majesty had promoted him to Imperial Deputy Prefect, which meant that he was in charge of the affairs of the palace, which was different from the duties of the 6 ministries of the Imperial Court and the military. This time around, Imperial Deputy Prefect Rinpoche will be in charge, and Tao Jiuan will be assisting him. They will patrol Mount Damo and Mount Liuzue and think of ways to increase the production of iron ore. If there are results, we will definitely reward you generously. Yes, Your Majesty. Rinpoche and Tao Jiuan bowed and complied. After hearing these words, Rinpoche knew why the Empress wanted to promote him. If he were to be in charge of the iron mine, his position as a secondary class 8th rank officer would be too low. He would be promoted to the secondary 5th rank, the same rank as the Ordnance Department's director. Coupled with his special status, it would be more appropriate for him to be in charge. Guard Tingji of the Yiwei School, bring 300 winged cavalry warriors with you to protect them along the way. If anything happens, you will be held responsible, the Empress said coldly. The armored general immediately complied. He naturally knew who the Empress wanted him to protect. If both of them were to encounter danger at the same time, Rinpoche was afraid that he would have to bring Deputy Prefect Rin back. Otherwise, he would really have to raise his head to see the world. Go back and prepare. We will set off after noon. Rinpoche, stay behind. After the Empress finished speaking, Tao Jiuan and Tingji left one after another. This is Feng Ho from the Ordnance Department. I have something to ask you. Greetings, Chief of the Department of Ordnance. Rinpoche turned around and cupped his hands. Deputy Prefect Ren, I would like to ask if you have any confidence in expanding the production of iron ore? Feng Ho turned around and looked at Rinpoche. That depends on the iron ore content and distribution. If it's just mining, there should be a way, Rinpoche said after thinking for a while. I heard from Her Majesty that Deputy Prefect Ren has a way to smelt iron ore and forge weapons? I wonder if you can tell me so that I can be prepared, Feng Ho asked again. The main problems in smelting iron ore are insufficient temperature and unstable temperature. The simple method is to use bellows. However, for a long period of time, we will need a steel-making furnace to continuously smelt steel. This process is very simple, the equipment requirements are low, and the stability is high. If the produced steel has low carbon content and fewer impurities, it can be forged directly. This saves a lot of manpower compared to forging by hand, Rinpoche explained. What is bellows? What is a steel-making furnace? What is steel? Feng Ho frowned and asked 3 questions in a row. With regards to this husband chosen by Her Majesty, he had the same opinion as everyone else in the imperial court. They all looked down on him. Otherwise, everyone wouldn't have objected to it back then. On one hand, he was too weak. On the other hand, other than bootlicking, he didn't seem to have any other abilities. This morning, Her Majesty summoned them over and said a few things. Her Majesty wanted to increase the production of iron ore. Not only Her Majesty, but the entire Ministry of Works had also racked their brains but still couldn't come up with a good solution. The two iron mountains were simply too difficult to mine. For so many years, they had been mining slowly like this. Countless people racked their brains to no avail. Everyone felt that this was the only way. This time, Her Majesty let Rinpoche take charge and patrol the mines to find a solution. If that was the case, Rinpoche wouldn't say anything and let him do it. In any case, the Department of Military Arms would benefit from it, and it didn't matter if it didn't succeed. However, from what Her Majesty said, Rinpoche was going to intervene in the smelting and forging of weapons. In that case, Rinpoche couldn't just let him do it. If Rinpoche intervened, what could he do as the head of the Department of Military Arms? Furthermore, did Rinpoche really know how to mine, smelt, and forge weapons? If Rinpoche was really capable, everyone in the Department of Military Arms would listen to him. Otherwise, Feng Ho wouldn't allow Rinpoche to intervene in the Department of Military Arms. Therefore, he suggested to ask storyteller Ren. Rinpoche didn't mind. Instead, he explained in detail, "You can try the bellows. It's a big box with a handle and a push board on one side and an air inlet. Then, a person will push and pull from one side to send air through. The air is full of oxygen, and with enough oxygen, the fire will burn better. Furthermore, if someone keeps pushing and pulling, the fire will be more stable and the temperature will be higher, making it easier to smelt." Rinpoche roughly explained. As for the steel-making furnace, first of all, what is steel? If ordinary iron is used to forge weapons, it will be very brittle. Therefore, it needs to be forged to remove the impurities and reduce the carbon content. In the end, the result is actually steel. The steel-making furnace directly removes the impurities during the smelting process, reducing the carbon content and directly smelting the steel. This way, you can at least save the time and effort of hammering and forging. Rinpoche explained. Feng Ho frowned as he didn't understand. The things that Rinpoche said made him feel that it was awesome even though he didn't understand it. He had been in the Department of Military Arms for more than 10 years. Even if he didn't say that he was proficient, he still had a rough idea of what was going on. However, he actually didn't understand what Rinpoche was talking about. The Empress looked at Feng Ho, who was frowning and thinking hard, and the corners of her mouth curled up. This was what she wanted to see. Naturally, she was clear about the thoughts of everyone in the imperial court. Her husband was chosen by herself, and it wasn't up to others to interrupt. But to be looked down upon like this, she was more or less unhappy. Chapter 157. In the afternoon, Rinpoche walked out of the palace wearing the official uniform of the imperial deputy prefect. There were already 2 carriages waiting outside the square. Both were pulled by crooked cows, but their appearances were very different. One was from the palace, and it was pulled by 2 crooked oxen. The carriage was completely made of wood, and it gave off a wooden fragrance. The coachman was an old man with short white hair and a square face. He looked very solemn. The other carriage belonged to Tao Jiuan. It was also pulled by 2 crooked cows, but the carriage was slightly smaller. Behind the 2 carriages, there were 4 rows of cavalrymen in leather armor. They didn't wear helmets and only had a feather on their shoulders. This was the most elite army under the Empress, the winged cavalry. There were only 1,500 of them, but the weakest among them was no weaker than an Earth rank expert in Great Xia. Those who had just attained the Earth wheel level could hold a military position below rank 7 in Great Xia. The same strength could also hold a military position below rank 9 in Dayo. However, they were just ordinary cavalrymen in the winged cavalry. These winged cavalry were riding on huge goats. These animals ran very fast and were especially good at jumping. They were comparable to the mountain-gazing birds when it came to climbing mountains, but it was a little more bumpy. The reason why they chose this kind of mount instead of the mountain-gazing birds was probably because these cavalrymen were huge and their weapons were too heavy. On the other hand, when a large number of mountain-gazing birds gathered together, the smell was really hard to resist. Thank you very much. Rinpoche waited for the imperial guard behind him to put his luggage in the carriage before cupping his hands and thanking him. This imperial guard was also very familiar with him. He and another imperial guard were usually at the entrance of Pingle Park. Today, he was on duty. That imperial guard grinned widely, cupped his hands at Rinpoche, and returned to the palace. Deputy Prefect Ren Tao Jiuan came down from the carriage and greeted him. In the morning, he didn't look at Rinpoche carefully. At this moment, he carefully scanned Rinpoche from top to bottom and didn't see anything special. However, when Sir Feng returned just now, he actually asked him to listen to Rinpoche's arrangements. This made him feel astonished. He really wanted to know what they talked about in the palace after he left. It was a pity that Feng Ho kept this matter to himself. He couldn't possibly say that he didn't understand what Rinpoche said, right? Looking at Rinpoche's confident look and those words that he didn't understand, Feng Ho wavered a little. He didn't know if Rinpoche really understood these things. At this moment, the Empress opened her mouth and said, "In that case, let's leave it at that for now. We will know when the time comes." Seeing this, Feng Ho swallowed all the words he wanted to say and waited to see how Rinpoche's trip to the iron mine was going. Deputy Prefect Ren, may I ask if we are setting off? Tengji dismounted from his mount, took a few steps forward and asked. Thank you for your hard work, Captain. Let's go, Rinpoche said. At the same time, he looked back at the tightly shut palace gates before turning around and getting into the carriage. The carriage pulled by the two crooked oxen wasn't big, only about 1.6 meters. If one wanted to lie down, one would have to stretch one's feet out. The floor inside was covered with a layer of fur, and there was a small table on the side for placing drinks or fruits. However, the carriages at this time had wooden wheels and were very bumpy. They could only store alcohol in the city, but once they were out of the city, there was no need to think about it. Rinpoche sat cross-legged in the carriage, leaned against the wall, lifted the curtain, and looked outside. Following that, Tengji gave the order, "Move out." Everyone turned their mounts around, and the oxen carriage moved forward slowly. When they were out of the city, the speed of the carriage increased. Rinpoche looked at the scenery outside along the way and felt the tremors of the carriage. He could even feel a small stone being pushed over. Fortunately, the fur cushion under his body played a big role. However, even so, he couldn't sit still after 4 hours. He lifted the curtain and squeezed to the side of the coachman, feeling the wind and dust on his face. After a while, he returned to the carriage with a mouthful of dust. Long-distance travel in this world is simply torture. Rinpoche heaved a deep sigh and continued to lift the curtain to look outside. There weren't many sceneries to see in this world. There were only mountains, rivers, fields, and occasionally, animals that were startled by the roadside. In the beginning, it was still somewhat refreshing to look at, but after a long time, it became boring. Now, he somewhat regretted that he didn't bring his e-book along. At least, he had something to pass the time. At the same time, a thought emerged in his mind. If he were to return to Earth in the carriage, where would he be when he reappeared? Or would he be in the carriage? Or would he be at the place where he disappeared? The journey this time around would take 5 days. He really wanted to give it a try. Unfortunately, if he disappeared, he reckoned that he would be discovered in less than half a day. Rinpoche lifted the curtain and asked the coachman, "How much longer before we can rest?" "Sir Deputy Prefect, there is a village in front." The coachman looked very familiar and directly replied. Rinpoche nodded his head and surveyed the surroundings. At this moment, it was already dark and he couldn't see anything. He could only hear the howls of wild beasts in the night sky from time to time. After another hour, the horseman in front slowed down and eventually came to a complete stop. Tengji turned to the side of Rinpoche and Tao Jiuan's carriage and shouted, "Sir, Luya village is in front. Please wait for a moment and wait to inform the village chief." After a while, the horseman in front returned and the group continued to slow down. Rinpoche had never seen a village in this world, so he lifted the curtain and sat beside the coachman. The village wasn't too big. After standing for a distance, he could see a circle of wooden fences in front. It was probably to prevent wild beasts from entering. Therefore, even though it was called a village, it was more like a stockade. Rinpoche guessed that the Aboriginals used to live like this when they were in the mountains, and some of them still maintain this habit after they left the mountains. After a long time, this tradition was passed down. Rinpoche asked the coachman, and the truth was exactly as he thought. If there were no attacks from wild beasts, perhaps after a few decades or hundreds of years, as the village expanded, these wooden fences would also disappear. As the group entered the village, the entire appearance of the village was revealed in front of Rinpoche. Most of the buildings were made of wood, and the bottom of the buildings were supported by wooden stakes that were at least 20 centimeters in diameter. They were about half a meter tall and were completely used to prevent rainwater and some snakes and insects. There was a fishy smell in the village. Many of the houses had animal skins and dried wild vegetables that were being hung to dry. As a result, the smell was very strong. When they realized that the army had entered the village, the villagers weren't afraid at all. They walked out of their houses and waved to the crowd with a smile. Most of their clothes were animal skins, revealing their bronze skin. The smiles on their faces were very simple and full of enthusiasm. However, when they saw Rinpoche sitting in the carriage, they curiously sized him up. After all, with one look, they could tell that he wasn't an Aboriginal. The relationship between the Aboriginal army and the commoners is very good. Rinpoche immediately had this thought. The village was almost circular in shape. In the middle was a circular open space. There were many things like stone locks. Presumably, these were used by the villagers to hone their bodies when they had nothing to do. At the side, there was also a wooden shelf with some wooden sticks on it. From this village, one could see how much the Aboriginals valued martial arts. The residences were built around this open space and were divided into 2 levels. There were about 100 households in one sweep, and the entire village had about 200 to 300 people. At this moment, every household had lit up their oil lamps. Some people came out to greet them while others leaned against the window and looked outside. Rinpoche got down from the carriage and stretched his body. This day's journey was really too torturous. At this moment he could finally relax. Tao Jiuan also jumped down from the carriage at the side. However, he looked much better than Rinpoche and didn't seem to be tired. "Sirs, this is the village chief. The biggest house belongs to the village chief. Tonight, the 2 sirs will be resting at the village chief's house." Tingji brought an old man over. "Greetings to the 2 sirs. Thank you for your trouble." Rinpoche cupped his hands and said. On the other hand, Tao Jiuan nodded his head. After staying at the village chief's house for a night, Rinpoche endured the buzzing sound of the mosquitoes. The next morning he yawned and went straight into the carriage. He swore in his heart that he would rather stay in the carriage next time. He didn't know if it was because of those animal skins that were drying outside that attracted so many mosquitoes. Furthermore, they only bit him. At least when he asked Tao Jiuan in the morning, he didn't get bitten by the mosquitoes. Even these mosquitoes knew how to bully the weak and fear the strong. Chapter 158. But with so many people waiting for me, I have to write. My friends are waiting for me. Chapter 159. After 4 bumpy days on the road, Rinpoche saw many things along the way. What surprised him the most was that every time they stopped at a village, the winged cavalry warriors would teach the children martial arts in the morning. Even though it wasn't much, a little bit of guidance was already very valuable to these children as it could help them avoid many detours. The Aboriginals spared no effort in this aspect, as well as the relationship between the army and the commoners, made Rinpoche feel sentimental. This was rarely seen in history. Other than a few armies, such as the current dynasty, most of the time, the commoners viewed the army as tigers and wolves. A few days later, when they arrived at a small city, Rinpoche suggested resting for a day. Even though the others were a little dissatisfied with this request, they didn't say much. After all, Rinpoche's identity was special. Rinpoche told the others not to disturb him and to place the food at the door before returning to Earth. The long and arduous journey these few days had indeed made him unbearably tired, and he needed a good rest. Even though it was a little pretentious, it was worth a try. After all, he was just an ordinary person. Even after arriving in Dayo, he didn't suffer much. The toughest time was probably the night of the Great Hunt. That time, he was more mentally tense and couldn't be mentioned in the same breath as the fatigue he felt this time. Even if he didn't talk about these, it was time. Finding a place to stay now was better than suddenly disappearing tomorrow. After Rinpoche returned, he immediately threw himself onto the bed. It was soft, quiet, and the bed wasn't bumpy at all. It was simply too comfortable. After sleeping for 4 to 5 hours, Rinpoche woke up. He was also unwilling to move and tossed and turned on the bed. After a long time, he finally got out of bed and made himself a cup of instant noodles. After staying at home for 3 days, Rinpoche once again returned to that world. It was midnight. After lying on the bed for a few hours, he heard a knock on the door. "Sir Deputy Prefect." "Come in." Rinpoche sat up from the bed. "Sir Deputy Prefect, it's time to set off." The person who entered was Tingji. After seeing Rinpoche, he finally felt relieved. On this day, Rinpoche didn't make a single sound in the room. The food at the door was also left untouched, which made him feel uneasy. If Rinpoche hadn't informed him in advance, he would have barged in. "All right, I got it." Rinpoche nodded his head, got out of bed, and washed up. An hour later, he returned to the carriage and continued his journey. Mount Damo was one of the 2 iron mines in Dayo, and it was filled with all kinds of prisoners. Most of them were soldiers from other countries who were captured during the border conflicts between Dayo and the other countries. Currently, there were close to 1,000 of them, and some of them were even at the intermediate level of the man-will level. However, after being shackled here, they didn't even have the chance to escape. Although the mine was filled with young and strong warriors, the mining progress was still very slow. Even if they used human lives to fill in the gaps, it would be of no use. The rocks in the mine were like refined iron. A single strike would cause a series of sparks, and at most, a white dot would appear on the surface of the rock. There was a team of 300 people guarding this place, and the weakest among them was equivalent to low-level man rank. Dayo's less than 60,000 soldiers were stationed at the border, and the 3 nations didn't dare to invade lightly. This was because of their formidable individual strength. Even though the 60,000 soldiers who were above the man rank were divided into 3 directions and facing 3 nations, they were relying on the Aboriginal soldiers who were at least at the man rank. This was the foundation of Dayo. On this day, a carriage slowly approached the foot of Mount Damo and stopped at the foot of the mountain. "Who are you?" The guard at the entrance of the mine took 2 steps forward and asked. This was a location in the depths of Dayo. Furthermore, the person who came was also an Aboriginal. As such, they didn't have any vigilance. "Ask your commanding officer to come out." "This is Her Majesty's warrant," Tingji said in a deep voice from his mount. While waiting, Rinpoche and Tao Jiuan alighted from the carriage. They took advantage of this time to stretch their bodies. After 2 days of sitting in the carriage, their bodies were rusting to death. Even though Rinpoche had rested on earth for 3 days, seeing that Tao Jiuan's condition was actually better than his, he couldn't help but admire the physique of the Aboriginals. These few days, Rinpoche and Tao Jiuan had become more familiar with each other. After all, they could still chat along the way. On the 3rd day of their journey, Rinpoche and Tao Jiuan traveled together in the same carriage and chatted a lot. After chatting with Tao Jiuan, Rinpoche discovered that not only was Tao Jiuan literate, but he had also learned a lot of knowledge in various aspects. He could be considered a rare talent among the Aboriginals. After chatting for a while, Rinpoche found out that Tao Jiuan's family had produced a few generations of high officials among the Aboriginals. They had collected quite a lot of books from other nations. 500 volumes was considered a rather rich collection among the Aboriginals. Tao Jiuan grew up in such an environment, so it was no wonder that he was so knowledgeable. However, this was also related to his weak physique, which made it difficult for him to have any achievements in cultivation. It was said that he had an elder brother who was currently serving in the right army. Even though his current position wasn't as high as Tao Jiyuan's, his prospects were far greater. In the eyes of the Aboriginals, a position in the army was the one with the greatest prospects. At least, when Tao Jiyuan mentioned his elder brother, his tone was full of longing. Everyone didn't have to wait for long before they saw 3 people hurrying down from the mountain. They were all wearing leather armor and had thick sabers hanging from their waists. "I'm the one in charge of guarding this valley. Do you have Her Majesty's warrant with you?" The leader was a burly man in his 40s with a big beard and dusty leather armor. He cupped his hands and spoke loudly. At the same time, his gaze wandered across the few people. He could naturally recognize the winged cavalry at a glance. After all, this was the only unit with a colorful sparrow feather on their shoulders. However, his gaze was more focused on Rinpoche and Tao Jiyuan. It was obvious that these two were the ones in charge here. Even though the winged cavalry was powerful, they were Her Majesty's personal army and obviously had nothing to do with him. "This is Imperial Deputy Prefect Ren. This is Minister Tao of the Military Arms Department. I am Lieutenant Ting Ji of the Winged Cavalry. This time, I am here on Her Majesty's warrant to patrol this place and look for ways to expand the mining." As Ting Ji spoke, he threw a piece of white paper out as if it was a hard object. Gu Qiong caught it with one hand and glanced at it. Following which, he smiled and said, "So it's the few of you. Please come in." Rinpoche and Tao Jiyuan didn't board the carriage anymore. They walked towards Gu Qiong and cupped their hands as a form of greeting. "General Gu, please lead the way." The rest of the people followed behind. Rinpoche couldn't see the entire view from the foot of the mountain. However, as Gu Qiong walked up, he gradually saw the entire view of Mount Damo and the mine. The most eye-catching part was Mount Damo. It was 600 to 700 meters tall and looked like an upside-down pot lid. There was almost no vegetation on the entire mountain, especially in the direction where everyone was standing. It was as if a section of the mountain had been chopped off and only uneven rocks could be seen. At the foot of the mountain, there were at least 1,000 people busily working. They were holding hammers and pickaxes and were working hard to cut open the mountain. They were also moving the rocks that they had smashed down. Chapter 160. Mining on Mount Damo has been going on for close to 100 years, but there hasn't been much progress. Mount Damo can be said to be completely made of iron. It is extremely hard and difficult to mine. After so many years, it has only been mined to the extent that you can see now. One person might not even be able to mine one piece in a day. Gu Qiong led the crowd in the direction of Mount Damo and introduced them to Rinpoche. He actually knew Tao Jiyuan as he had met him a few times before. This time, this imperial deputy prefect had a special status and was here for the first time. He was the one who needed to be introduced. Rinpoche's previous understanding of iron ore came from the information he found on the internet. After listening to Gu Qiong's introduction, he realized that Mount Damo might be different from what he had imagined. As they got closer to Mount Damo, the soldiers from the 3 nations who were locked up here appeared in front of them. Other than the guards, very few outsiders came here. In particular, there was a Dayo official in the middle of a group of Aboriginals who was obviously different from the rest. This made many people's eyes light up. These people had been locked up here for the longest period of 20 years and the shortest period was at least 5 years. They were constantly thinking of leaving this place and returning to their homes. However, the 300 guards were enough to suppress any riots here. In the past, no one who had such thoughts survived, regardless of whether they fought back or escaped. This made the remaining people somewhat resigned to their fate. However, today, they actually saw an official who wasn't an Aboriginal. Even though he was still a Dayo official, it gave these people a little hope. One by one, they stood on the spot and looked over expectantly. "What are you all standing there for? Get out of the way and get to work. If you continue to slack off, I will hang your heads over the wall." A few guards with knives drove the crowd away. Where are they from? Rinpoche also noticed that these people were obviously from the other 3 nations. The Aboriginals still trade slaves? Rinpoche immediately thought of this. They are soldiers from Great Xia, the Yun Nation and the Chen Nation. There are also some death row prisoners from the south. Gu Qiong introduced them to Renba Qian. He was also curious about the identity of this imperial deputy prefect. Not only was he a secondary class, rank 5 official, but he was also in charge of the imperial deputy prefect, an organization that was responsible for the affairs of the palace. Even though the news about the empress's husband had spread like wildfire in Lan City and its surrounding areas, and even some of the mountain villages had heard about it, it was obvious that Renba Qian hadn't heard about it yet. Renba Qian immediately understood after hearing this. The aboriginals weren't stupid and knew how to use war criminals to open up mines. As for the prisoners on death row in the south, they were the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. Renba Qian sized up these people as he walked. Their complexions were still all right, completely different from the sallow and emaciated state he had imagined. Many of them had bulging muscles. After all, working here, even an ordinary person's body would develop a body of muscles after a long time. However, if he really had the body of an ordinary person, he probably wouldn't be able to live for long. Everyone was only wearing tattered pants, and their tanned upper bodies were covered in scars. Some were from mining, and some were from whips. Apart from that, each of them had a rope tied around their feet. Every 3 of them were tied together, and the distance between them was about 2 meters. After asking, Renba Qian found out that the rope was woven from the bark of a type of tree known as the knot tree and then soaked in oil. It was very sturdy, and even a man-realm expert couldn't tear it apart. Even swords would have to expend some effort to cut it. On the way up, Renba Qian saw a few people with missing limbs. They were using their hands to pick up the scattered slag from the ground and put it into a basket. While observing these people, he also saw that they were looking at him with hope in their eyes. Their numb eyes were filled with a look of longing. Renba Qian knew what they were longing for, but it was a pity that he couldn't help them. After the people in front were driven away, Renba Qian followed Gu Qiong to the front of Mount Damo. From where everyone got off the train at the foot of the mountain, the first thing they saw was a large platform with many wooden houses. This was where everyone rested. Following which, there was another small platform. After which, there was a pitch-black Mount Damo without any soil or weeds. It was as if it was made of iron. The mining here was done layer by layer from the outside to the inside. There were no tunnels or anything like that. There were all kinds of racks in front of Mount Damo. Everyone climbed on the racks and slowly mined along the protruding edges. This way it would be easier. However, after reaching a certain height, even the racks couldn't reach the top. Hence, they had to continue digging deeper. Sir, the iron mine in Mount Damo is really difficult to mine. Even with my strength, I can only mine a small piece in one go. As Gu Qiong spoke, he picked up a pickaxe from the side and smashed it against the dark iron wall with a whistling sound. Dang! Sparks flew from the explosion. The wooden rake of the pickaxe was immediately smashed into pieces. The head of the pickaxe flew out and spun a few times in the air before falling to the ground. Along with the head of the pickaxe, there were some small fragments that were about the size of a fist. Those people can't even mine such a big piece in a day. So hard? Even though Renba Qian had heard about it before, he was still shocked. Even though he didn't know Gu Qiong's actual strength, as the person in charge of this mine, he had 300 guards under him. His strength couldn't be weak. Furthermore, Renba Qian clearly saw that the wooden handle of the pickaxe, which was as thick as a wrist, was directly smashed into pieces. Even if he didn't use 500 kilograms of force, he still only managed to smash out a piece the size of a fist. How was this a mine? This was simply an iron mountain. Renba Qian stretched out his hand and touched it. It was indeed iron. The iron content was at least 95% and there were very few rocks. If it wasn't for the fact that there were very few rocks, Renba Qian would have thought that this was man-made and not naturally formed. Even though there were rocks, they were very hard. Renba Qian picked up an iron awl from the ground and pressed it against the link between the iron ore and the rocks. He used a hammer and hit it with all his might. At that moment, sparks flew and there was only a white dot on the rock. Looking at this situation, Renba Qian wasn't very confident about the explosives that he had brought. Even if it was effective, it probably wouldn't meet his expectations. I have no other way. Sir, please feel free to look around. Gu Qiong didn't have much hope for the two of them. In fact, in his heart, he could only mine slowly like this. He wasn't very optimistic about the purpose of their trip. Tao Jiyuan was already clear about the situation here. He looked at Rinpochen with ease and wanted to see if this person, who was personally appointed by Her Majesty, was really capable. After interacting with Rinpochen for a few days, she could tell from his words that he indeed had some ideas in some areas. Furthermore, he always said some strange things, but it was useless to just talk. There were plenty of countries that were full of boastful words. He was also a little unconvinced that this person was actually favored by Her Majesty. Therefore, he wanted to see if this person was relying on Her Majesty's favor to be whimsical and deceive Her Majesty with his big talk, or if he really had a way. If he was personally appointed by Her Majesty to be the person in charge with great fanfare and returned with his tail between his legs, it would be interesting. Chapter 161. Rinpochen looked at the iron mountain in front of him. He had some doubts in his heart. Was this really a natural product? Compared to a mine, Rinpochen was more willing to believe that this was a huge piece of meteorite. Unless, billions of years ago, such a huge piece of meteorite fell on the ground. Then, after many years of tectonic movements, the huge basin that should have appeared here became a plain, and this piece of meteorite became Mount Damo. In Rinpochen's heart, this was more likely than a natural product. Otherwise, this iron mountain would be too unusual. Can we make a few holes here? Rinpochen pointed to the protruding part of the mountain wall above his head and asked Gu Qiong. The hole was the size of a fist and had to be at least 1.5 feet deep. The rock wall began to protrude about 3 to 4 meters above Rinpochen's position. It should be very difficult to mine at that height. However, if he were to make a few holes in that area and use explosives, it was very likely that a big piece would be blown off. After all, he wasn't an expert in explosives. He could only roughly guess where the explosion would be more effective. Sir Deputy Prefect, although I don't know what you are planning, but it is indeed impossible to make such a big hole. At most, I can make a hole that is the size of a fist. Any deeper and we have to dig to the side. Gu Qiong said with a troubled look. Rinpochen frowned after hearing this. Gu Qiong's words should be true. However, in this case, it would be very difficult for explosives to be of much use. In this kind of situation, if it was on Earth, there were many ways to think of. For example, using acetylene to cut the rock piece by piece. However, most of these methods either required electricity or gas tanks. For example, he could only bring 1 bottle of acetylene at a time. Furthermore, he had to bring it all the way here. Otherwise, based on the road conditions in Dayo, he was afraid that it would blow up halfway. However, if he brought it here, his secret would be exposed to people other than the Empress. This was unacceptable. Bring me around Mount Damo to take a look. Rinpochen pondered for a long time. It was better to take a look at the surrounding situation first. There was still some time before the sky turned dark. At the very least, they could take a look at the situation of the Iron Mountain. Rinpochen realized that this mountain was indeed like what he had imagined. It was a gigantic meteor. The structure of this mountain was completely different from the surrounding land. All the iron ores were gathered on the mountain. Furthermore, there were very few plants growing on the mountain. All the plants were weeds and the like, which were relatively hardy. It was likely that the dust accumulated on the mountain over many years had formed a layer of soil on the surface of the mountain. On the way back, Tao Jiyuan asked the frowning Rinpochen, Sir Ren, do you have any ideas? I have an idea, but I still have to try to see if it will work. Rinpochen was startled out of his thoughts. He raised his head and glanced at him. That's great. Over the years, countless people have tried to find ways to speed up the mining of the iron ore on Mount Damo. They could only use manpower to mine it bit by bit. If Sir Ren has a way, it would definitely be a great contribution, Tao Jiyuan said with a smile on his face. In my opinion, rather than mining here, it would be faster to go out and rob, Gu Qiong muttered. Rinpochen rolled his eyes. Wasn't this nonsense? Most of the time, robbing was faster than mining and manufacturing. The problem was it that easy? By the time they returned to the camp, the sky was already dark. The convicts and laborers had also returned like a swarm of bees. They surrounded a few big barrels in the middle of the square and waited for the meat soup. However, very few of them spoke. They had been living like this for many years, and there were very few new convicts being sent over. Rinpoche could smell the aroma of the meat soup from afar. The food is good. If they don't eat their fill, they won't have the strength to work. After all, if they don't have enough strength, they won't even be able to chisel a small piece of this iron mountain. Rinpoche nodded. Gu Qiong had already prepared a wooden hut for him. Their dinner was also meat soup, but with some wild vegetables and 2 rations. Even for Gu Qiong, this was what he usually ate. This place was in the middle of nowhere. Other than the people who delivered the meat, there wasn't anyone else around. It was impossible to get anything else to eat even if he wanted to. After finishing his meal, Rinpoche had a good night's rest. When he woke up the next day, he called Gu Qiong and Tao Jiyuan to his room and said, "I have an idea that we should try. Pile a large amount of wood on Mount Damo and then pour water on it. After thermal expansion and contraction, cracks will appear on the metal. This should make it easier to chisel the mountain." Although Rinpoche said this, he wasn't optimistic about this idea. After all, transporting a large amount of wood would require a lot of manpower. Even though it would be easier than now, the efficiency would still be too low if the manpower needed to cut and transport the wood, as well as the time needed to set fire to the mountain and wash it with cold water. It wouldn't be much better than now. On the other hand, he had another idea. It was to go back and make a large number of mirrors and concave mirrors. He would adjust the angle of the concave mirrors and aim them at the mountain wall. Then he would use the mirrors to reflect the sunlight onto the concave mirrors. This way, the metal could be melted into molten iron in a very short period of time through the reflected light from the concave mirrors. After that, it would be much easier to extract and separate the molten iron. Thermal expansion and contraction? What does that mean? Tao Jiyuan didn't know what Rinpoche was thinking. He was very interested and curious about his idea. "We can demonstrate it." Rinpoche pulled everyone out of the house. "Start a fire first." Rinpoche gave the order. Gu Qiong immediately called someone to get the wood according to Rinpoche's instructions. After a while, a fire was started. Rinpoche picked up 2 stones and asked someone to use 2 iron awls to roast them on the outside of the fire. The rest of them looked at the instructions and were curious about what he was going to do. After a while, Rinpoche estimated that it was about time and asked someone to throw the stones into a bucket of water that was prepared at the side. First, there were some bubbles. After a few minutes, Rinpoche reached into the bucket and fished the stones out. There were already a few cracks on them. Rinpoche showed the stones to everyone. The rest didn't notice anything wrong, but Tao Jiyuan had a sudden realization and said, "I see." This was a very normal natural phenomenon. It wasn't that no one had discovered it. It was just that no one had summarized it or investigated the cause. Therefore, there was no concept of thermal expansion and contraction. Furthermore, no one had thought of applying this phenomenon to Mount Damo. Why is that? Tao Jiyuan asked curiously after a sudden realization. Because an object will expand after being heated. Even if you can't see it with your eyes, it is still expanding. And when an object is cold, it will contract. If this expansion and contraction situation occurs in a short period of time, such a change will occur. This is not only the case for stones, but also for iron. Rinpoche gave a rough explanation. If he were to talk about molecules, Tao Jiyuan would definitely not understand. Tao Jiyuan pondered. Gu Qiong widened his eyes and asked, "Sir Ren, are you thinking of burning down Mount Damo?" "Just burn one place will do." Rinpoche looked around. Even though there wasn't much vegetation on Mount Damo, there was vegetation on the surrounding mountains. Rinpoche asked someone to chop some wood to burn the mountain. Even though the efficiency was still very low, it was worth a try. It would at least speed up the mining process. When he went back, he would research on how to make a concave mirror. By then, he would be able to completely solve the mining problem of Mount Damo. Chapter 162. Sir Ren, do you think this method will work? Tao Jiuyuan raised his doubts. Although burning a rock was like that, he still felt that this idea was a bit ridiculous. Not only him, Gu Qiong, Ting Ji, and the others who were listening at the side all had the same thought. We will only know if it's feasible after trying. After all, we don't have any better ideas now, right? Rinpoche spread his hands. That's true. Tao Jiuyuan nodded. Lord Gu, I'll have to trouble you to arrange it. Next, Gu Qiong selected 100 guards to escort the 300 convicts to a faraway place to chop wood. 3 prisoners were tied together with ropes. 300 prisoners were exactly 100 groups, and 100 guards were just enough to keep watch. Mount Damo was an anomaly. There were many other mountains in the vicinity, and every single one of them was lush and green. Only Mount Damo was barren, without a single blade of grass. The distance needed to cut down the wood was not considered short. After all, the nearby daily cooking was almost done. After a whole day, a total of 30 tree trunks with a diameter of more than 20 centimeters and a length of more than 3 meters were brought back. The prisoners in the mine also stopped digging. They dragged the 30 logs to the platform at the foot of Mount Damo and chopped them into smaller pieces. After working for 2 whole days, a total of 50 tree trunks were dragged back. The ones that were brought back on the first day had been chopped into lumber the size of an arm. Now, all that was left was to burn the mountain. A group of more than 100 people, along with over 20 carts and over 70 four-corned cows, advanced towards Mount Damo. The four-corned cow was one of the most commonly used meats in Dayo. Its growth rate was very fast, at least 50% faster than the crooked cow. The crooked cow took 5 years to mature, but the four-corned cow only needed 3 years to mature. However, the taste of this kind of beef was very ordinary. It was relatively dry, which was what the army usually ate. The rest of them were here to deliver supplies to the Mount Damo iron mine. Every 20 days, apart from food, they would also deliver some forged pickaxes, iron awls, and other digging tools. The Mount Damo iron mine had used up a lot of tools. Brigade Commander, look over there. Someone immediately shouted when they saw thick smoke billowing in the direction of Mount Damo as they turned a corner. In Dayo, 10 people formed a team. The team leader was a secondary class, rank 9. The 12 squads formed a brigade with a brigade commander, who was a secondary class 8th pin. 5 brigades made up a regiment, with lieutenants ranging from secondary 7th rank to primary 6th rank. Usually, a regiment would have 650 to 700 people, including logistics. The 5 regiments would form an army with 3,300 to 3,800 men. 5 armies for 1 prefecture, about 15,000 people. This was an entire brigade. When the brigade marshal heard this, he raised his head and his facial expression immediately changed. Something has happened at Mount Damo. 2 of you will go back and report. 1 of you will guard this place. The rest of you, put down your things and follow me with your weapons. Once the order was given, everyone threw aside the things they were carrying. With one hand tightly holding onto the long sword, they marched quickly towards Mount Damo. The brigade commander frowned as he advanced. How could something happen to Mount Damo? Could it be that the prisoners were rebelling? But even if they rebelled, the 300 guards there were enough to defeat them. In fact, they didn't even need 300 people. 200 people would be able to completely defeat them. So what's with this thick smoke? This was clearly arson. As he was thinking and worrying about the situation at Mount Damo, the brigade marshal and his men traveled 60 kilometers in 4 hours and arrived at the foot of Mount Damo in a hurry. However, it was different from the chaos he had imagined. The guards at the foot of the mountain were still standing there quietly as if nothing had happened. What happened? The brigade marshal asked hurriedly as he looked up at the thick smoke above. It was like a pillar of smoke, and the smell of burning could be smelled from here. Nothing happened. Everything is normal, the guard immediately answered. The brigade marshal was relieved when he heard this. Then he was dumbfounded. Since nothing happened, what was going on up there? Brigade Marshal Sheng, you will know when you go up and take a look. The guard didn't understand the details and said, they said that they want to burn Mount Damo. Burn Mount Damo? How could this be possible? Wasn't this nonsense? When the brigade marshal heard this, he thought about how he and the others had rushed over here because of this matter, and he couldn't help but feel angry. Go back and send the supplies here. In addition, get someone to chase those two back. I will go up and take a look. After saying this, Brigade Marshal Xing wiped the sweat off his forehead and hurried up the mountain. At this moment, Rinpochen and the others stood in front of the wooden house and looked at the fire in the distance. A large amount of wood was burning there, and the soaring flames made it difficult for people to approach. General Sheng Kaishan pays his respects to all of you. Sheng Kaishan's eyes narrowed when he saw them. What surprised him the most wasn't the rank of Rinpochen and Tao Jiuan, but the fact that he actually saw the winged cavalry here. One had to know that the winged cavalry were the Empress's personal guards and wouldn't be easily mobilized. Who were the people who came this time? This is Imperial Deputy Prefect Ren, Sir Tao from the Ordnance Department, and Sir Teng Ji from Lan City. Kaishan, you should have arrived by now. Why are you here alone? Where are the things? Teng Ji stretched his neck and looked into the distance. Other than Kaishan, there was no one behind him. Kaishan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Sir Gu, I saw the smoke pillar from afar and thought that something had happened. I rushed here and left the things behind. They are now back with the convoy. Gu Qiong burst into laughter upon hearing this. After a while, Kaishan carefully asked, Sir, what are they doing? That deputy prefect Ren said that they were going to heat it up and pour some water on it to see if it would crack. Gu Qiong stroked his beard and turned his head. This iron mountain is full of iron. Isn't this quenching? Sheng Kaishan was puzzled. Even if he didn't know how to forge iron, he had more or less heard of quenching. Wasn't it just putting the forged iron into water? What was the difference between this and quenching? That's right. Gu Qiong slapped his thigh. Why didn't I think of this? Sir Ren, isn't this quenching? Gu Qiong turned his head and shouted. Rinpochen nodded after hearing what he said. Quenching has a special process and requirements. Usually, the carbon and other substances in the iron have already been expelled by hammering to become steel. Even so, if something goes wrong, it will crack, let alone iron. You don't have to worry about this. After hearing what Rinpochen said, everyone was puzzled. In any case, it sounded like Sir Ren was stronger than them. I didn't expect Sir Ren to know how to forge, Tao Jiuan casually said. I know a little. Let's keep the fire burning until the afternoon. Don't add more firewood afternoon. I will go back to my room to rest. Rinpochen bade farewell to them and returned to his room. When it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Rinpochen estimated that it was about time. He walked out of the wooden hut and asked someone to call Tao Jiuan, Gu Qiong, and the rest out. After the fire started to die down, Rinpochen instructed, get some water and pour it directly on Mount Damo. Everyone immediately got into action after hearing this. The rest of them also perked up. This time, they only burned an area that was 10 meters long. As they poured buckets of water onto the mountain wall, sizzling sounds could be heard. Every bucket of water that was poured onto the mountain wall created a cloud of white steam. Soon, the people nearby could no longer stand. Seeing this, Rinpochen retreated a little further. After an hour, Rinpochen waved his hand to stop everyone and said, It's about time. Let's go and take a look after the steam dissipates. They waited until the sky turned dark. Then, they raised their torches and approached the mountain. Can it really split open? Those who knew the whole story did not have much confidence. One by one, they looked at Rinpochen. We will know soon, Rinpochen said. He was a little nervous. What he knew was only theory. If it did not succeed, it would be embarrassing. Moreover, a large number of concave mirrors could not be produced in a short period of time. He was afraid that he would be helpless in this place. As the torches shone on the mountain wall, everyone saw that it was still the same as before. Immediately, their hearts skipped a beat. Could it be that it did not succeed? Rinpochen did not say a word. He walked until he was 1 meter away from the mountain wall and stopped. He carefully examined the mountain wall. Finally, a look of relief appeared on his face. Cracks, it actually split open. Gu Qiong walked to Rinpoche's side and carefully examined the mountain wall. Immediately he shouted in surprise. Under the light of the torches, the mountain wall of Mount Damo was covered with small cracks. Although the cracks were not very big, the speed of mining along the cracks would be at least 2 times faster. Sir Ren, this method actually worked. I really admire you. Sir Ren has contributed greatly this time. Tao Jiyuan stepped forward and saw the cracks on the mountain wall. At first, he was surprised. Then he revealed a look of congratulations. Chapter 163. Rinpoche sat on a chair in a daze. This was a shady place and the surrounding temperature was as hot as a fire. According to the season of Great Xia, it was already late autumn, but the weather was still extremely hot. Clanking sounds of chiseling could be heard from Mount Damo in the distance. After burning the mountain yesterday, hair-thin cracks appeared on the mountain wall. Gu Qiong and Tao Jiyuan were overjoyed. They felt that they had found a way to excavate Mount Damo. However, Rinpoche was not as optimistic as the two of them. He reckoned that only the surface of the mountain had changed. Of course, this was because both parties had different requirements. Rinpoche wanted to obtain iron ores that could be used to forge weapons for the 20,000 soldiers. Dayo's standard thick-backed sabers were not the kind that ordinary people used. Each saber weighed about 20 kilograms and required at least 22 kilograms of iron ores. On Mount Damo, 1,000 prisoners could only mine 80 kilograms of iron ores in a day, which could only be used to forge 4 sabers. After 2 years, they would only be able to forge about 2,000 ores. Furthermore, all of these ores would be used by the army. One had to know that Dayo didn't only require weapons for the army. It also required hunters in the mountains and ironware for daily use. Rinpoche did not go to Mount Myotsue, but he had asked Tao Jiyuan about it. It was located in the mountains and the mountain paths were difficult to traverse. Even though mining was much easier, transporting the ores was also a big problem. What could a country with a population of 30 to 40 million people produce 10,000 to 20,000 kilograms of iron ores in a year? Sir, today's ores weigh at least 400 to 500 kilograms. This is the amount that was mined in the past 4 to 5 days. Rinpoche did not know when he fell asleep. He was woken up by Gu Qiong's loud and excited voice. Oh, 400 to 500 kilograms? Rinpoche rubbed his eyes. Starting a fire would take a day, then watering the ores. After that, it would take another day to mine the ores. Then bring out more wood. It would be best to mobilize some manpower from the surrounding cities to transport the wood. Then we will burn the mountains separately. One day on the east side and one day on the west side. We will take turns burning the mountains and mining. This will increase the efficiency. Rinpoche stretched his body and said. He wondered what the surrounding mountains would look like in a few years. After all, if they wanted to burn this iron mountain for mining, the amount of wood consumed in a year was not a small amount. However, the growth of trees took 10 years. Moreover, with the decrease in the surrounding wood, if they wanted to maintain this mining speed in the future, they would need to send wood from afar, and that would require even more manpower. Let's leave it at that for now. I'll go back and study that concave mirror. Sir Ren is right. Tao Jiyuan saw that Rinpoche had doubled the output of the iron ore in just 1 or 2 days. Furthermore, if Rinpoche had done what he said just now, the output would have increased by 3 or 4 times. He immediately felt some admiration for him. However, I'm afraid this matter will require His Majesty's orders. Let's go take a look. Rinpoche got up and asked Gu Qiong to lead the way. They went to the foot of Mount Damo to study and observe. As expected, it was just a thin layer. The length of half a finger was about 3 centimeters. Physician Tao, I'll have to trouble you to submit a memorial to Her Majesty and explain the situation here, Rinpoche said as he turned around. During dinner, Tao Jiyuan and Gu Qiong's faces were still filled with excitement. Rinpoche didn't want to disturb their enthusiasm and just said, I'm going to have a good rest tomorrow. Don't disturb me no matter how big the matter is. You don't have to prepare food for me either. Yes, Sir Ren. After bidding farewell to them, Rinpoche returned to his room and returned to Earth when everyone was about to fall asleep. It was evening on Earth. Rinpoche first turned on his computer and searched for the news that he had read before. He typed in the keywords and quickly found more than one. 70 years ago, someone had done such an experiment. The first 50-kilowatt solar furnace made of liquid mirrors could melt a steel plate that was 1 centimeter thick in 30 seconds. 50 years ago, a laboratory was built using 10,000 concave mirrors. It could reach a power of 1,000 kilowatts and instantly reach a temperature of 3,500 degrees Celsius. The melting point of iron was only 1,538 degrees Celsius. Therefore, there was no need for such a large mirror. It just needed to be a little smaller. In a video on the internet, a foreign guy used 5,800 fingernail-sized mirrors to melt a satellite pot lid. All these proved that Rinpoche's previous idea was feasible. It didn't need to be as big as the foreign laboratory. It only needed to be 1/10 the size. It could even be divided into 10 parts and assembled together. After all, it was just to melt the wall of Mount Damo. There wasn't a high requirement for precision. As long as the focal point was within a certain range and the temperature within that range was sufficient, it would be sufficient. That night, Rinpoche contacted a physics professor from a university in the city through Chin. They met up the next day and Rinpoche told him his request. He needed a solar furnace that could be made of concave mirrors that could be moved and angled. It could melt steel that was 300 to 400 meters away. The other party needed to provide him with a solar furnace that could be carried by a single person. He also needed to make molds for the concave mirrors in Dayo and a series of installation plans for the concave mirrors. To Rinpoche, this was very troublesome. However, to the other party, this matter was very simple. After all, Rinpoche didn't have high requirements for precision. He could even throw it to his students and the remuneration was 500,000 yuan. After settling this matter, Rinpoche rested for 2 days before returning to Dayo. Mount Lyote was actually on the outskirts of the 60,000 mountains on the west side of Dayo. However, to reach the location of the iron or mine, one would need to walk for 2 days. Furthermore, the mountain road was very difficult. It was the biggest difficulty in transporting the iron ore. A few days after leaving Mount Damo, Rinpoche walked on this mountain road. When he first entered the mountain road was still all right. After all, this road was often used by people. However, after a day, the mountain road started to meander and it became difficult to walk. On one side was a mountain wall, and on the other side was a mountain stream. There was only a 1-meter wide road in the middle. Even though people could walk, it was impossible for people to ride on mounts. Even if people could walk, they wouldn't be able to walk fast. At least, every time Rinpoche glanced at the bottom of the cliff, he would feel dizzy. One had to know that it was 200 to 300 meters below the cliff. If he fell, he would immediately become a meat patty. Rinpoche suddenly realized that he had a big weakness. He was afraid of heights. He didn't realize this previously. Seeing him like this, Tengji was also on tenterhooks. He followed closely behind Rinpoche, ready to pull him up at any time. If something were to happen to this person, he wouldn't be able to go back. After walking on this road for half a day, they finally arrived at a valley with cliffs on 3 sides. Rinpoche could finally relax and felt that he was alive again. The valley wasn't too big. Other than over 100 guards, there were about 700 to 800 people mining here. Chapter 164. In the valley where Mount Liaotsue's iron mine was located, the ground was so hard that not even weeds could grow. Not long after entering, there were a few rows of wooden buildings. There were no fences or anything like that around them. Most of the people here were aboriginals. After mining here for a few years, they would be released early. Usually, no one escaped, and the guards were not strict. Rinpoche had already stayed here for 2 days. Every day, he would use a piece of cloth to cover his face and walk around. There was too much dust in the valley. All of it had drifted over from the mines. When one woke up, they would find that their surroundings were covered in dust. The quality of this iron or mine was average, but it was easy to mine. It was currently the most productive iron ore mine in Daeyo, although it was not much compared to the iron ore on Earth. For the past 2 days, Rinpoche had been pondering how to make transportation easier. As long as the supply and the transportation of ores could keep up, the output of the iron mine could increase by several times or even more. The valley was surrounded by cliffs on 3 sides, and one of them was the narrow path. Regardless of whether it was the ore being transported out or the supplies being transported in, they all passed through this path. On the other side was a deep mountain stream. There was a stream at the bottom, but after a short distance, it flowed into the ground. As for the other 2 sides, they both led to the 60,000 mountains, and it was not easy to get in and out. It was not realistic to open a path from this side. At first, Rinpoche considered using a cable to transport the weapons. However, if Daeyo had the steel to make cables, it would have been used to forge weapons. Furthermore, the materials required for the cable could only be produced in Daeyo in a few years. Moreover, the support required for the cable was something that was difficult to build in this world. As for the rope, there was no need to think about it. It would wear out too quickly, and it was not practical to use it to transport ores. In addition, Rinpoche had also considered using hot air balloons. However, considering the difficulty of manufacturing hot air balloons and the amount of fuel required, he was afraid that the transportation speed of 2 or 3 hot air balloons wouldn't be much faster than the current method of carrying people. Not to mention the airflow in the valley, hot air balloons were never meant to be used as a means of transportation. No matter how he thought about it, the only possibility was to open a tunnel. Rinpoche pointed at the mountain in front of them and asked Tao Jiuan, "Have you ever thought of opening a hole on this mountain that leads directly to the other side?" "Shu, Sir Ren, just think about it and don't say it out loud," Tao Jiuan said nervously. "What's wrong?" Rinpoche was astonished. It's said that there's an unknown existence in this mountain. In the past, the Hao nation also wanted to dig through this mountain, but it would collapse after digging for a few hundred feet. They dug a total of 3 times. The 3rd time, they angered the existence inside the mountain. Not only did the miners die, but the 2,000 soldiers outside also died. Not a single person survived. From then on, the Hao nation never thought of digging up the mountain again. Rinpoche looked at Tao Jiuan suspiciously. Was it really that scary? How many years has it been? Really? Rinpoche found it hard to believe. It's been 100 years, but no one dares to touch this mountain. Tao Jiuan smiled bitterly. Rinpoche thought about the Kirin that he had seen before. This world was too different from Earth, and there were too many unknowns. Tao Jiuan's words might not be true. Can the mountain road be widened? Rinpoche asked again after putting the previous question aside. Since they couldn't dig a tunnel, it would be good if they could expand the mountain path to 3 meters so that fork-horn cows could pass through. Although this was a huge project, the iron mine was the foundation of a nation. It was acceptable to pay a higher price. Moreover, he could get his hands on explosives to blow up the mountain wall. Tao Jiuan's expression became strange. This mountain road can only be so wide. The more we dig, the more the road will collapse. It has always been this wide. Rinpoche looked up at the mountain in front of him. In this case, he had no other choice. Digging and touching can't be done. Are you trying to scam me? What exactly is in this mountain? If I have the chance, I really want to dig it up and take a look. However, this idea was just a thought. Rinpoche wasn't someone who liked to take risks and court death. In this case, there's no point for us to stay here. Let's leave tomorrow. Rinpoche sighed. This time, I'm just accompanying Sir Ren to take a look. Tao Jiuan laughed. If Rinpoche didn't want to take a look, he wouldn't have come here. Is it okay to dig here? Rinpoche asked again. If we dig here, we won't care about the thing inside, Tao Jiuan said directly. But I still don't like this place. Rinpoche nodded. His hair stood on end when he heard what Tao Jiuan said. In any case, there was already a plan for Mount Damo. Transportation there was convenient. As long as he could use the solar furnace to melt the iron mountain, he would be able to obtain enough iron in a short period of time. His purpose for coming here this time would be achieved. He would explore Mount Liutsue in the future when he had the opportunity. The two of them stood there and looked for a while. Renbachien decided to go back and rest for a night before setting off. On the way back, he saw the guards pulling two crooked cows in the direction of the 60,000 mountains and walking up the mountain. Renbachien had seen them kill cows a few times over the past 2 days, but they had never brought the cows so far away. As a result, he was puzzled and asked, "What are they doing?" Tao Jiuan thought for a while and called a guard over to ask. "The bichi is going down the mountain. These are prepared for it. After eating these two cows, it won't come down to eat anything else," the guard said to the two of them. "What's a bichi?" Renbachien asked curiously. In his impression, the aboriginals would just pick up a knife and slash anything they saw. When had they ever paid tribute? Tao Jiuan revealed a look of realization and said, "So it's a bichi. It's a ferocious beast in the 60,000 mountains. It looks like a mountain rat, has wings, and can run and fly. Furthermore, it's as fast as lightning. Even experienced hunters in the mountains would find it difficult to kill it. Instead, it would find an opportunity to launch a sneak attack." Sir is right. The bichi will come down the mountain twice every spring and autumn. If it can't find anything to eat, it will attack the other cows here and bite all of them to death. If it is beaten, it will find an opportunity to retaliate. As a result, 2 cows are placed on the mountain every time. After it eats them, it won't come down, the guard said. At first, Renbachien thought it was a bat, but he realized it wasn't. It seemed like it was a creature unique to this world. Its vengeful nature was similar to that of a weasel. "Can I see it if I find a place to hide?" Renbachien asked curiously. He was somewhat interested in this kind of strange animal in this world. "Sir, it's better not to see it. It's said that those who see the bichi will encounter disaster. It's extremely accurate." Chapter 165. Renbachien had always felt that he was rather cowardly, but wasn't cowardice the longer one could live? Every day, there were so many people who felt that they were powerful and wanted to die. In the end, they really died. This kind of news made people vigilant. For example, a woman's clothes were scratched by a tire repairman, and she refused to forgive him. Her father also grabbed the repairman and beat him, even if the repairman knelt down and begged for mercy. One had to know that kneeling in China was a big deal. However, the father and daughter were still unwilling to give up and continued to smash the stall. In the end, the common man was enraged, and his blood splattered 3 feet. Every time Renbachien saw such news, he would be on high alert. It was better to be a coward. Just like in the afternoon, when he heard that anyone who saw a bichi would encounter a disaster and that it was extremely effective, he immediately followed the advice and suppressed his great curiosity. Even if she looked like a flower, he wouldn't look at her anymore. But what is this little thing in front of me now? Renbachien's head was filled with question marks. It was crimson red and looked a little like a fox. Its bean-sized eyes were full of cunning. Most importantly, it had a pair of wings on its back, fleshy like a bat's. Just now, when Renbachien was in a daze in the room, this little thing suddenly came in through the window and stared at Renbachien. "I'm already avoiding you, and there's no enmity between us. Why do you have to do this?" Renbachien looked innocent. Renbachien felt that it was necessary for him to know what the other party was up to. It couldn't be that they were just here to see him, right? Although the other party was a wild beast, wild beasts were intelligent. Even crows had the IQ of an 8-year-old child. The intelligence of weasels and foxes was not low, so the person in front of him should not be an idiot, right? "Take whatever you like. Consider it as a gift from me," Renbachien said tentatively. It was obvious that Renbachien was overthinking. At the very least, the other party didn't understand human nature and didn't know what he was talking about. Her pair of bean-sized eyes continued to stare at him. Renbachien suddenly realized that this little thing's eyes didn't seem to be staring at him. Instead, it was staring at his hand, or the side of his hand. This little thing's eyes were so big, and it was staring right at him. He didn't know what it was looking at, but he subconsciously felt that it was staring at him. After some time, Renbachien finally realized that the other party wasn't looking at him. Instead, It was the white rabbit creamy candies in his hand. Renbachien picked up the white rabbit creamy candy and shook it left and right. The little creature's eyes also moved left and right. I'm giving it to you. Remember to peel it open and eat it. Renbachien didn't know if it could understand him, so he threw the bag of white rabbit creamy candy to the side. In a flash, the little thing picked up the bag with its mouth, transformed into a scarlet shadow, and disappeared into the night sky outside the window. Renbachien rubbed his head. Just now, he had nothing to do and ate 2 pieces of candy. Was this thing attracted by the candy? That shouldn't be possible. The 2 cows were led up the mountain. They were so far away. Even an immortal wouldn't be able to smell the sugar. But no matter what, the white rabbit had once again performed a meritorious deed. Lin Qiaola, the Empress, and this is called a bichi, right? The white rabbit's charm was irresistible. After thinking about it, Renbachien decided to close the window. Even if it was a little stuffy, he would accept it. In the middle of the night, Renbachien felt that he had a dream. In his dream, the mountains were shaking, and there was a loud roar of a beast in the distance. Just when he wanted to investigate further, he suddenly heard a rumbling sound from the surroundings. Then the entire house collapsed. Tengji and Tao Jiuan felt the ground trembling and hurriedly ran out of the room. Just when they wanted to pull Renbachien out of the room, they heard a rumbling sound. The wooden house that Renbachien was staying in had collapsed. Immediately, the 2 of them tensed up. Anything could happen to anyone during this trip, except for the person inside the house. However, something had to happen to him. Save him, quickly save him, Tao Jiuan shouted loudly. Without saying a word, Tengji rushed to the front of the house and started to lift up the collapsed roof. When the house collapsed, he lifted up a large piece of the shattered roof with his bare hands and threw it to the side. Save him, quickly save Sir Ren, Tao Jian shouted at the other winged cavalry warriors who were rushing over. Sir Ren, are you all right? Sir Ren? Tengji was also shouting at the pile of broken wood. One after another, the rest of the people came over to help. They threw out the broken wood and dug towards the location of Renbachien's bed. At this moment, Renbachien's mind was in a mess. The beam of the wooden house was broken from the top, and the other end was supported by the collapsed wall. It was just enough for him to hide inside and not suffer any injuries. Even so, his heart was beating rapidly. Did he encounter an earthquake? If it wasn't for his good luck, he would have died here. As he thought about it, Renbachien curled his body into a ball and didn't dare to move in the darkness. When he heard the shouting outside, he immediately shouted loudly. After a while, Renbachien was dug out from the inside with dust all over his body. Looking at the starry sky and the surrounding torches, a feeling of surviving a calamity immediately welled up in his heart. Sir Ren, your luck is really good. You actually didn't suffer any injuries. After checking Renbachien's body, Tao Jiuan finally felt relieved and smiled. Tengji and the rest were also relieved. I also feel that my luck is really good. Renbachien sighed. Out of so many wooden houses, only mine collapsed. Fortunately, nothing happened to me. It can be considered a blessing in a misfortune. Initially, I didn't believe you when you said that you would be unlucky after seeing a bichi. Now, I somewhat believe it. Renbachien continued. Sir Ren saw it? Tao Jiuan was surprised. It was scarlet red, about this big, had a pair of wings and very small eyes, right? Renbachien gestured and said, just now, before the lights went out, I don't know why it ran in through the window. It stared at me for a while before running away again. When everyone heard Renbachien's words, they all had a weird expression on their faces and took a step back. After a long time, Tao Jiuan said with an ugly expression, Sir, the one you saw is called a bichi. It's even rare. Usually, bichi are gray in color and represent misfortune. But the one you saw is extremely rare, which means that fortune and misfortune depend on each other. Indeed, fortune and misfortune depend on each other. Renbachien thought of his encounter just now and deeply agreed. If he didn't see that little guy, he reckoned that the house wouldn't have collapsed. Otherwise, why would his house collapse out of all the houses in the surrounding? But even though the house collapsed, he was actually unharmed. The phrase, fortune and misfortune depend on each other, was not wrong at all. But the people in the surrounding only have misfortune and not fortune. Tao Jiyuan continued to add. What do you mean? Exactly what I meant. Fortune and misfortune depend on each other. But during this period of time, the people around you will only encounter misfortune and not fortune. Tao Jiyuan's expression was ugly. Ren Baqian looked at the surrounding and finally understood why the people in the surrounding retreated. He also understood why Tao Jiyuan and Ting Ji's expressions were so ugly. Chapter 166. That's the meaning of the words. Fortune and misfortune go hand in hand with each other. However, during this period of time, the people around you will only encounter misfortune and not fortune, Tao Jiyuan said with an ugly look on his face. Everyone looked at Rinpochen as if they were looking at a pile of feces. Rinpochen turned his head to look at the people around him and thought that this couldn't be true, right? Then he pointed to the distance with an innocent face and said, "There's a fire, let's put it out first." Everyone turned to look at the kitchen that was on fire not far away, then turned to look at Rinpochen and took another step back. The guards in the distance had already rushed over to put out the fire. Now, even Rinpochen felt that it was too strange. However, it could also be a coincidence. He hoped that was the case. Otherwise, how could he return to the city with the attribute of a jinx? Just now, it was only a very small earthquake that stopped in less than a minute. Everyone waited for a while, and seeing that nothing happened, they went back to rest in 2s and 3s. Rinpochien's residence was changed to the wooden house that Tao Jiyuan originally stayed in. Tao Jiyuan ran over to squeeze in with Teng Ji and the other winged cavalry warriors. Now, he was unwilling to sleep in the same house as Rinpochen. Rinpochen slept in the house that Tao Jiyuan slept in previously. He was on tenterhooks for half a day, afraid that something would happen again. After a long time, he fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, everyone started to pack their things and prepared to leave the mountain. In fact, there wasn't much to pack. However, Teng Ji specially asked for a tree bark rope from the guards and tied it around Rinpochien's waist. If it was before, he would only be a little worried. However, after the incident with the Bichi, his worry had escalated from a little to a lot. If anything happened to Rinpochen, they would really only have misfortune and no fortune. As they walked out of the mountain, other than an extremely skilled winged cavalry warrior who walked in front of Rinpochen and Ting Ji who followed behind, everyone else stayed far away. Especially Tao Jiyuan, he had already hidden at the back. I feel that there should be no problem. It's not like the Grim Reaper is here. They had already walked more than half of the mountain path. After the initial nervousness, Rinpochen gradually relaxed. Even if the Bichi really brought bad luck to people, it wouldn't be so immediate and frightening. However, Teng Ji didn't know what the Grim Reaper meant. His words couldn't make the other party relax. "Sir Ren, as long as we leave the mountain, there will be no problems," Teng Ji said. Rinpochen and the others heaved a sigh of relief as they walked through this section of the mountain road while trembling with fear. Fortunately, it shouldn't be that serious. Rinpochen turned his head and smiled. Even though everyone said so about the Bichi, Rinpochen was still a little skeptical after the 2 incidents that happened last night. Even though Rinpochen had transmigrated and seen the Kirin before, he still instinctively didn't believe in such mysterious things. This was the result of the education he had received and the habits he had cultivated. Just as Rinpochen was speaking, a shadow suddenly covered his entire body. Teng Ji's facial expression immediately changed. He pulled out his long saber and leaped towards Rinpochen's head. His speed was so fast that Rinpochen almost didn't have time to react. The people at the back could see a huge bird with a wingspan of 7 to 8 meters rapidly descending from the sky. It extended its sharp claws and pounced toward Rinpochen. Teng Ji slashed out with his blade and blood rained down from the sky. Soon after, the bird let out a miserable shriek and fell to the ground. The entire bird's chest and abdomen were split open by Teng Ji's blade. The contents of the bird's stomach splashed all over Rinpochen's head and face. Renbachien happened to raise his head to look and was splashed by the liquid. He almost vomited. "Sir Ren, are you all right?" Tengji turned around and looked at Renbachien after he landed on the ground. Renbachien wiped his face, pulled out a handful of internal organs and threw them to the ground. The stench went straight into his nose and his stomach felt like it was overturned. "Water, water!" Renbachien hurriedly shouted. Immediately, someone passed him a water bag and let him splash his face. His body was still covered in blood, but Renbachien finally felt that he was alive again. Just now, he almost thought that he was going to die from disgust. He hurriedly found a small stream nearby, took off his clothes and washed his body. Only then did he stand there with his pants on and let out a long sigh. "I'm sorry, Sir Ren. I was too anxious just now." Tengji cupped his fists and apologized. "It's all right. It's all thanks to you. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would be in trouble." Renbachien waved his hand. "What kind of bird is that? It actually dared to capture a human." While walking back he asked, "It's a flower eagle. This thing usually catches wild beasts in the mountains to eat. Occasionally it will attack humans, but it's very rare. I'm afraid that Sir Ren's aura isn't strong, which made it embolden its courage to attack," Tengji said. "Does this mean that I'm too weak and easy to bully?" Renbachien walked back and prepared to see what exactly the flower eagle looked like. When he reached the place, he saw that everyone was already plucking its feathers. "Sir, you are in luck today. This flower eagle is extremely difficult to catch and its taste is even better." Tao Jiyuan stood at a distance and smiled at Renbachien. Renbachien was speechless. "I was almost caught by this thing to eat and even got drenched all over my face. Is this considered a blessing for you guys?" Half of the feathers on this flower eagle's body had been plucked by the two winged cavalry warriors, but one could still roughly see its appearance. Its winged wings were 7 to 8 meters long, its body wasn't small either, it was at least 2 to 3 meters long, and its pair of claws were extremely strong. If it were to scratch a human body, it would probably leave a few holes. As for its appearance, before its feathers were plucked, it should still be quite powerful. Anyway, it was now a feathered phoenix that was inferior to a chicken. "Sir, there is this in its stomach." One of the winged cavalry warriors ran over and said to Tengji. He was holding something in his hands. After washing it with water, one could see that it was like colored sand. "Sir Ren, keep this." Tengji had an envious look on his face. "What is this?" Renbachien curiously took it and examined it in his hands. It was an extremely small granule that was only slightly thicker than sand. Under the light, it reflected a weak 5-colored radiance. "This is cloud crystal. As long as you add some of it when forging a weapon, an ordinary weapon will immediately become like a heaven-grade weapon. Not only will it be able to cut through iron like mud, it will also have various other effects. This handful of cloud crystals is enough to forge a top-notch weapon." Tao Jiyuan came over and looked at the thing in Renbachien's hands with an envious look. If this thing was in the hands of others, countless people would want to get their hands on it. Unfortunately, it was in the hands of this person, so there was no need to even think about it. Upon hearing this, Renbachien immediately found a bag and carefully placed these cloud crystals in it, afraid that he would miss out on any of them. At the same time, he ran over to the flower eagle's stomach that the winged cavalry warrior had cut open. It was at least the size of a few fists, and at this moment, it was completely empty. Even though he had no use for this thing, it would be good to gift it to the Empress when he returned. Or perhaps he could sell it for a large sum of money. Or perhaps he could bring it back to Earth for examination. Perhaps it could even have a greater use. This cloud crystal is extremely rare, and I don't know where this flower eagle found it. Perhaps it swallowed it into its stomach to aid in grinding and digesting its food. If we know where it found this cloud crystal, we might be able to find even more of it, Tengji said somewhat regretfully. Chapter 167. In Yangxin Palace Hall, a bowl was placed in front of the Empress. There were medicinal herbs and other things in it. It was emitting a very strong bitter smell. Just a whiff of it would make one frown. The bitterness of a single ingredient in this medicinal cuisine was enough to cover up all the other flavors. Thus, no matter what was done, only bitterness would be emitted in the end. After drinking a bowl of medicinal cuisine, the Empress's face turned slightly red. Her stomach felt as though it was on fire, giving off a scorching sensation. After a while, the warmth began to spread throughout her body. The Empress opened her eyes, took the candy from Hong Luan, and put it in her mouth. "Let him in," the Empress said coldly. After a while, Feng Ho quickly entered the hall and bowed. "Greetings, Your Majesty." "Let's see." The Empress used two of her fingers to pick up a piece of paper that was placed at the side. She transformed into a white line and flew in front of Feng Ho before she suddenly slowed down and was caught by him. Feng Ho lowered his head and looked at the contents of the paper. It was a report on the mining situation of Mount Damo after it had cooled down. "It's actually possible," Feng Ho exclaimed after seeing the results. Just this alone was enough to increase the production by 2 or 3 times. If 2 or even 3 locations were to take turns burning the mountain and more people were sent to mine, the production could increase by 4 or 5 times. The daily output of 400 to 500 kilograms of iron ore was enough to forge more than 15 weapons. In a year, it would be around 5,000 weapons. In 2 years, it would be 10,000 weapons. For the current daimyo, it would be able to solve its urgent need. In this way, only half of the weapons for the new army of 20,000 were left. Apart from using part of the iron ores in Mount Liuzue for civilian use, some of it could also be used to forge weapons. In this way, the shortfall would be even smaller. Through some clans in the Yun Nation and the Qin Nation, they would be able to make up for most of the remaining iron ores. The real shortfall would not be much. "Congratulations, Your Majesty. It is truly fortunate to have such a good thing at such a time. Deputy Prefect Ren has made a great contribution this time. I will request for a reward for Deputy Prefect Ren," Feng Ho said with a delighted look on his face. Ren Baqien had actually increased the output of Mount Damo's iron ore by so much. This was really beyond his expectations. That Deputy Prefect Ren seemed to have some ideas. In that case, even if he came to the Department of Ordnance to stir things up, he wouldn't be able to make any suggestions. "It's good that you are aware of this matter. I will issue an order to mobilize manpower to cut down the trees and transport the materials. You will be in charge of the arrangements. Don't delay this matter, or else you will be severely punished," the Empress said coldly. "This subject obeys," Feng Ho replied. After Feng Ho left, the Empress said, "Call Hong Bao over." After a while, Hong Bao carried a cloth bag and walked into Yangxin Palace Hall with large strides. He knelt down on one knee and said, "Your Majesty, fortunately, I did not fail you." At the same time, he opened the package to reveal a box. It was filled with lime powder and a human head. "Clean it and present it to me." After the Empress finished speaking, someone immediately carried the box away. A moment later, the head was presented to the Empress. The Empress took a closer look at the head. The face of the corpse was very ugly, but it indeed looked exactly like that person. Immediately, she felt an indescribable sense of irritation in her heart. She waved her hand and said, "Take it away and deal with it." "Hong Bao, tell me the details," the Empress asked again. I followed him all the way to Great Xia, and after confirming his route, I waited for him at the Severing Dragon platform. After listening to Hong Bao, the Empress calculated the time and realized that the 7th prince's death happened to be the evening before she was brought to that world by Rinpochen. This time around, 50 winged cavalry warriors followed Rinpochen, Tingji, and Tao Jiuan into the Mount Liuzue iron mine. There were a total of 53 winged cavalry warriors including Rinpochen, Tingji, and Tao Jiuan. At this moment, most of the winged cavalry warriors had already dispersed. Some of them continued to look for prey in the surrounding areas. After all, a flower eagle wasn't enough for everyone. Ren Baqien found a place to sit and rest. He was rubbing a cloud crystal in his hand. This was his big harvest from this trip. At this moment, Rinpochen heard a mournful cry in the sky. The sound was so sharp that it seemed to pierce through one's eardrums. "It's here!" Tengji, who was stabbed into the ground, stood up and looked into the sky. What's here? Rinpoche raised his head and saw a small black dot circling in the sky. The mournful cry came from this small that was circling in the sky. Flower eagles usually travel in pairs. If one dies, the other won't survive alone. That flower eagle has found its way here, Tengji said while caressing his long saber. He didn't look nervous at all. If the flower eagle didn't launch a sudden attack, it wouldn't pose too much of a threat. In fact, a flower eagle wasn't considered a powerful creature in the 60,000 mountains. It was just relatively rare and difficult to catch. Some of the surrounding people raised their heads to take a look, following which, they continued to busy themselves with the things on hand. Evidently, they didn't care much about it. When Rinpoche heard Tengji's words, he felt that it was a pity. This kind of animal that was dead while the other wasn't alive was still very touching. It was especially easy to have a good impression of it. This was especially so for young men and women. Chirp! Another mournful cry sounded in the sky. That flower eagle is descending. Rinpoche felt that the flower eagle seemed to have become bigger. Very quickly, Rinpoche confirmed his thoughts. That flower eagle was indeed getting bigger. When it was about 200 to 300 meters in the sky, Rinpoche could already feel the power of that flower eagle. Following which, that flower eagle circled in the sky once again. Following which, it ferociously charged in the direction of Rinpoche, Tengji, and the rest. That's right, it simply didn't think of leaving this place alive. It only continued to accelerate and carried its entire body weight as it crashed down from the sky. Sir, don't move, Tengji said. When that flower eagle transformed into a brown silhouette in the sky, Tengji leaped 7 to 8 meters into the sky with his saber. With a crash, a rain of blood fell from the sky. 2 pieces of a corpse with internal organs and blood sprinkled down from the sky. If I don't move, I will be drenched in blood again. Rinpoche knew what Tengji was going to do when he saw his actions. He broke into a run and ran to the side. Even though that flower eagle was crashing over at a slanted angle, it was still going vertically downwards. According to the current situation, when Tengji chopped the flower eagle apart, it happened to be on top of his head. This point could also be seen from Tengji's almost vertical leap. However, Rinpoche, who had run 4 to 5 steps away, turned his head and saw that half of the flower eagle's body whizzing towards him. He immediately cursed, "Damn you." If he had stood at his original position, nothing would have happened. However, he ran a few steps to the side. However, that half of the flower eagle's body with its wings just happened to split into 2 before crashing down. Sir, be careful. When the winged cavalry warriors at the side saw this scene, they were shocked. This flower eagle flew down at an extremely fast speed. Even though it was chopped into 2, the force of the falling half of its body wasn't small. If it was someone else, it would still be fine. However, if it was Rinpoche, at the very least, his bones would be broken. A few of the winged cavalry warriors leaped up and pounced towards where Rinpoche was standing. One of them leaped into the air and kicked the falling flower eagle's body. Blood immediately blossomed. That part of the flower eagle's flesh was directly smashed by his kick, but half of its body was also sent flying to the side. Phew! Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Thank you, brother. Rinpoche wiped the blood off his face and thanked that winged cavalry warrior. He then hurriedly ran to wash his hair and face. When he came back, the flower eagle's stomach had already been cut open. Is there any? Rinpoche asked anxiously. No, there are only ordinary gravel. Everyone knew what he was asking and immediately showed him the thing that they took out from the flower eagle's stomach. It was just a handful of very small gravel. Things like cloud crystals could only be encountered and not sought. Chapter 168. He had to admit that the flower eagle's meat was indeed fresh and tender. Furthermore, it was roasted over a fire, and its fragrance assailed his nostrils. He felt warm all over after eating it. It was said that the flower eagle's meat was very nutritious. It was a pity that the 2 flower eagles could only be eaten by everyone. Otherwise, Renbachien would have kept one piece and stored it in the fridge on Earth for future consumption. Outside the mountain, everyone found a small town to rest for a day. Renbachien then made use of this time to return to Earth. First, he asked the physics expert about the progress of the solar furnace. The small one that could melt a small piece of iron in a short period of time was already halfway done and would be ready in a few days. Renbachien was relieved after confirming that he would be able to get it after returning to Lan City. He then drove straight home. It had been 4 to 5 months since he last went home. He didn't even go back for the new year, so he had to go back to take a look. His home was still the same. The only change was that his father had bought a new car for 200,000 yuan, which was considered to have fulfilled his long-cherished wish. As for the rest of the money, it was still being saved by his parents. If Renbachien was short of money in the future, he could take it out or save it for Wang Yan's wedding. Who was that girl last time? Renbachien accompanied his father to drink some white wine during the meal. After 2 glasses of wine, his father mentioned the girl in red that he saw that day again. Not only him, but Mama Ren and Ren Wanyan also pricked up their ears. I have said that I am a business partner. I had something to discuss with you the last time. Don't think too much about it. If I have a girlfriend, I will bring her back. Renbachien's face didn't change as he spouted nonsense. Renbachien thought about how he was still an honest young man at this time last year. Now, he could spout nonsense without batting an eyelid. Fate really made a fool out of people, and public morals were degenerating day by day. After staying at home for 2 days, Renbachien returned to his rented house and returned to the other world. Are you ready? Let's go. Renbachien pushed open the door and said to everyone waiting outside. A few days later, Renbachien looked at the lofty city wall that was getting closer and closer. He was finally back. This time, he had been away for more than half a month. He basically ran around every day and could only rest when he returned to Earth. He was already tired. Furthermore, he somewhat missed that person in the palace. The winged cavalry warriors sandwiched the 2 carriages and entered the city. Renbachien put down the curtain, leaned against the bumpy carriage, and closed his eyes to rest. In a shop not far away, a person was looking at the winged cavalry and horse carriage entering the city in the middle of the road. After sizing them up for a long time, he went out and turned into an alley at the side. After making a few more turns, he finally arrived at a courtyard. The courtyard was silent. After he knocked a few times on the wall inside the door, a few young men with indifferent expressions walked out of the room. That person is back. The carriage has just entered the city. There are others? There's also a group of 100 Qi Zixiao's winged cavalry warriors guarding the left and right. He was protected by the winged cavalry when he came out this time, which shows how much Qi Zixiao values him. I don't know when he will come out of the palace again, and I'm afraid he won't come out alone. It's better to take a risk. In any case, there's no way we can return alive from this mission. Even if it's a risky move, I still need to be able to kill him. He's just an ordinary person. Even with the winged cavalry, our 4 repeating crossbows can turn him into a hedgehog in a split second. It's too hasty to chase after him now. Continue to monitor him and wait for the next time he comes out. Kill him in one shot. Finally, a person who had been silent all this while spoke up. The others nodded and didn't argue anymore. However, in this unfamiliar city, especially when the surrounding people were mostly different from them, it was indeed difficult to keep an eye on the other party without being suspected. As for life and death, they were all men of sacrifice and didn't intend to return alive. All they wanted was to drag the target down with them. When the convoy stopped in front of the palace, Renbachien got off the carriage and stretched his body. Then he saw the palace gates open and an imperial bodyguard shouted, "Imperial Deputy Prefect Renbachien, Director of the Ordnance Department Tao Jiuan, and Captain of the Winged Cavalry, Ting Ji, please enter the palace for an audience." Renbachien walked in the familiar palace with light footsteps. He had achieved half of his objectives this time and also brought a gift for the Empress at the same time. It wasn't too bad. The only bad thing was that he didn't know what the situation was. In the throne room, The Empress sat on the seat of honor and looked down at the few of them. She asked about the things that happened along the way and then waved her hand to let the other two leave. You saw the Bichi? The Empress frowned and looked at Rinpochen. Rinpochen nodded his head. This was what he said just now. It was better to say it himself than to let others say it. Looking at Tao Jiuan's posture, it seemed to be quite serious. However, nothing happened during the past few days and Rinpochen was relieved. However, when the Empress asked him about it, his heart was in his throat again. Forget it, be more careful in the future. The Empress sighed and said, Follow me and tell me about the things that happened along the way. Rinpochen followed the Empress to the garden and sat down in the pavilion. Along the way, Rinpochen told her about the things that happened along the way. In fact, there wasn't much to talk about. He mentioned a few things about Mount Liutsue and wanted to hear what the Empress had to say about the thing in the belly of the mountain. After listening, the Empress played it down and said, In the past, there was a legend that there was a monster in there. The first emperor went there before but returned with serious injuries. Since then, the thing in there has been a taboo, and I am not very clear about it. If there is a chance in the future, I would like to see what exactly it is. According to the legend, the thing in there has existed for at least 1,000 years. Rinpochen was speechless. There was actually something in there. It was really hard to imagine that it had existed for more than 1,000 years without dying. Could it be that something like the Kirin was in there? Rinpochen suddenly thought of a question that he had never asked before. He had never thought much about it before. However, if there was something in this world that had existed for more than 1,000 years, Rinpochen suddenly felt that the lifespan of the people in this world was very likely to be different from that of the people on Earth. At the thought of this, Rinpochen raised the question. The Empress looked at him in surprise and said, You actually don't know? Ordinary Aboriginals have a lifespan of about 70 to 90 years. If they cultivate to the Kismet heaven level, they can live for 120 to 140 years. If they cultivate to the cardinal heaven level, they can live for 180 to 200 years. After that, there is the longevity heaven level, and it is said that they can live for more than 300 years. The first generation emperor cultivated to the longevity heaven level, but he only reigned for 20 years before his whereabouts were unknown. Kismet heaven, cardinal heaven, and longevity heaven were actually the cultivation realms of the Aboriginals. In front of them was the four-way heaven. As long as ordinary Aboriginals reached adulthood and practiced a little, they could reach the four-way heaven level, which was equivalent to the man-wheel level. Compared to the great Xia practitioners, there was only one man-wheel expert out of 100. This was a huge advantage. Kismet heaven was equivalent to the earth wheel level to the heaven wheel level because the heaven wheel level was also known as the path to heaven. As the name suggested, if one couldn't make it, one would fall back to the peak of the earth embryo stage. The cardinal heaven level was equivalent to the spirit wheel level. As for the longevity heaven level, it was already a legendary level. It was said that Great Xia also had other levels above the spirit wheel level, but ordinary people didn't know about them. In fact, the Aboriginals were much stronger than the practitioners from other countries at the same level. This was completely brought about by the strength of their bodies. Rinpochen had learned about these classifications from Lin Xiaola when he was learning Rui visualization, but he didn't expect that the lifespan of the Aboriginals would be so much longer than that of the people on Earth. He originally thought that the Aboriginals would at most live for about 100 years. Based on this calculation, Rinpochen was shuttling back and forth between the other world and the real world. Furthermore, the time period wasn't equal. If his body aged according to the time that he had experienced, if he lived for 60 years, only 40 years would have passed in the other world. If his Rui visualization couldn't increase his lifespan, wouldn't he already be old when the Empress was 60 years old? On the other hand, the Empress could at least live to about 180 years old. At this thought, Rinpochen's mood immediately turned sour. Chapter 169. 100 years for the Earth embryo realm and 150 years for the spirit wheel realm are just a rough estimate. There are also people who can live up to 160 years at the spirit wheel realm, the Empress casually said. She then looked at Rinpoche and asked, "Are you worried?" "I'm afraid that I won't be able to accompany your majesty for that long." Rinpoche looked at the Empress and smiled. The Empress remained silent for a while before replying, "I don't really understand your Rui visualization, but I don't think it's any weaker than the great Xia practitioners. When you reach the Earth embryo realm and have a good understanding of your own body, you'll be able to understand. Also, you don't have to think too much about it. Although there aren't many treasures in this world that can extend one's lifespan, there are still a few." Rinpoche didn't say anything else. Instead, he asked, "But I see that all the officials in the imperial court are quite young." This was something that Rinpoche found rather strange. If Kismet heaven experts were 120 to 140 years old, then some of the court officials should have been around since the establishment of Dayo. But now, most of the people in the imperial court were no more than 40 or 50 years old. Only a few of the great elders and young elders were slightly older, but they were probably no more than 80 years old. They all left 50 years ago. The first emperor, all the officials, and some of the soldiers who founded the nation, the Empress said. "Where did he go?" Rinpoche asked. "I don't know. No one knows. They guess that he might have entered the 60,000 mountains. If I can break through the longevity heaven, I will be able to find out where they went," the Empress said. Longevity heaven, Rinpoche thought. Longevity heaven could live up to 300 years, which was equivalent to 900 years on Earth. He didn't know how long he could live. However, it seemed that there was no need to be too pessimistic. Since he had to travel between the two worlds, based on the calculation of 3 days in this world and 3 days on Earth, 6 days for him would be equivalent to 12 days on Earth. After 10 years, it would be 20 years on Earth. Technology would advance further, and there might even be new technologies that could extend one's lifespan. Another 30 years would be 60 years on Earth. At that time, it was hard to say how advanced technology would be. Perhaps when the time came, his lifespan would also increase by a few hundred years, or he might even be able to create another body. Therefore, he did not need to think too much about it now. He just needed to cultivate hard and live well. However, when he was 43 years old, his younger brother, Wan Yen, was almost 60 years old. His parents were already in their 90s. That was a bit of a pity. He could only hope that Earth's technology would advance faster and become more developed. "Your Majesty, I obtained this from Mount Lyote. I have no use for it, so I wanted to bring it back for you." Rinpoche took out a small bag and handed it to the Empress. The Empress was a little surprised when she took it and opened it. Inside was a slightly withered white flower. Below the flower was some fine sand that emitted 5 colors. When I saw this flower in the mountains that day, it was pure white and crystal clear. Although it was in the mountains, it stood out from the crowd. I felt that it must be very suitable for your Majesty. It's a pity that it has withered after being picked for so many days, Rinpoche said with some regret. The corner of the Empress's mouth curled up. She took out the small white flower from the bag and looked at it. Then she sniffed it gently and glanced at him. She found it funny and said, "I have this magnolia in my garden." Rinpoche was astonished. "I thought that this flower's outstanding charm would make her the king of flowers, which is very rare." However, a dozen meters in front of him, there was a white flower fluttering in the wind. The Empress didn't care about his little trick. She played with the small white flower for a while before putting it back into the bag. "You are lucky to be able to find this cloud crystal," the Empress said. "This fell from the sky." Rinpoche laughed. Then, he told the Empress about how the flower eagle swooped down from the sky and tried to catch him. In the end, Tingji cut open its abdomen and found this cloud crystal in its stomach. However, there was no need to talk about how his face was drenched in blood and internal organs. It was too disgusting. "You better train well, or else it will always be dangerous," the Empress said. Rinpoche nodded. He knew that his strength had increased a little over these days. It was about 145 kilograms. The medicinal effects of the previous medicinal bath had been completely absorbed by him. "Go back and train first." This trip was delayed. Otherwise, you would have had your third medicinal bath soon. The Empress said, after training, accompany me for dinner at Yangxin Palace Hall. In that case, I will take my leave first. Rinpoche stood up, cupped his hands, and left. Not only did he want to take a medicinal bath, but he also wanted to keep those TNT explosives. The explosives that were originally prepared to be used in the mine were brought back by Rinpoche. If it accidentally exploded, 40 kilograms of TNT would probably be able to flatten Pingle Park and the surrounding courtyards. There were 3 rooms in Pingle Park. Normally, 2 of them were occupied by a maid. However, Rinpoche didn't have a maid, so those 2 rooms were always empty. His belongings had already been sent to his room. He went back to find the TNT explosives and placed them in the room next door. Then he called for someone to take a medicinal bath. After he finished cultivating in the medicinal bath, even though he was still tired, he felt much better than before. At least, he didn't feel like his body was hollowed out, and he immediately went to bed. Looking at the time, Rinpoche sat on a stool and took a nap. After about an hour, he realized that the surrounding sky was about to turn dark. He hurriedly rushed to Yangxin Palace Hall to look for the Empress. The Empress was leaning against the wooden couch and reading a book. Not far from the wooden couch was a table, a hot pot, as well as sliced meat and vegetables. "Your Majesty, I am late," Rinpoche said. "It's all right." The Empress waved her hand. Soon after, Rinpoche went forward to add the base ingredients to the hot pot and added some charcoal. Both of them ate the hot pot for a while. Rinpoche looked at the Empress, who was eating silently with her head lowered. He then thought of the figure dressed in red who was sitting on the sofa eating ice cream and watching the morning news while he was making breakfast. His heart stirred and he said, "Your Majesty, do you still want to go to my world to take a look?" This time was different from the previous time. Previously, he accidentally brought the Empress to that world, but this time, Rinpoche took the initiative to invite her. The meaning was also different. This also meant that Rinpoche didn't try to hide anything anymore. In fact, there was no need to hide anymore. The Empress had already been there, so what was the point of hiding? When the Empress heard what Rinpoche said, she looked up at him and nodded slightly. Even though she looked calm on the surface, she was still somewhat happy after hearing what Rinpoche said. And because of this, she looked even calmer on the surface. After eating the hot pot, the Empress called Exanja over and gave her some instructions. "I will be away for a day, don't worry. If anyone wants to see me, tell them that I am cultivating and won't see them." "Your Majesty, it's better for me to follow you there," Exanja quickly said. Chapter 170. On Earth, in the house that Rinpoche had been renting, 2 figures suddenly appeared out of thin air in the originally empty room. If someone were to see them, they would probably be scared to death. When the 2 of them came out from the palace, it was pitch black with only a faint light shining in from the window. This made Rinpoche immediately realize that it was already late at night. When he felt the hand that was holding his wrist loosen, he turned around and turned on the light switch. The light instantly turned on, making Rinpoche feel a little dazzled. At this moment, the Empress was wearing the red dress that she wore when she came back from here. She was wearing a pair of black flat-soled shoes, giving off a modern vibe. However, the hair that was coiled up on her head and the golden hairpin did not match her clothes. The Empress seemed to be aware of this problem. She reached out and removed the hairpin from her head, letting her hair fall down. Rinpoche looked at the time on the wall. It was 1:20 in the morning. At this time in Dayo, it was only 8 o'clock. The 2 of them still needed to make up for the difference in time. 3 days here is equivalent to 1 day in Dayo, the Empress said as she looked at Rinpoche. The Empress looked at Rinpoche and said, she had already noticed this problem the last time she was in this world. That was because after staying in this world for 2.5 days, only 20 hours had passed since she returned. Rinpoche nodded his head. "It's a good choice to train here, but this world is too dirty," the Empress said after thinking for a while. The last time she was here, she always felt that her nose was uncomfortable. If it wasn't for the fact that her physical fitness was too good, She would have gotten rhinitis in such an environment. Rinpoche spread out his hands and said, "This is the inevitable process of technological development. There are gains and losses. Perhaps after a few years, this world will return to its original state. It might be better or it might be worse. Who could say for sure what would happen in the future?" However, technology was advancing, and people's understanding of the environment had improved a lot. Rinpoche was still inclined to believe that the future would become better. "Your Majesty, take a rest first. I will bring you around tomorrow," Rinpoche said. The next morning, Rinpoche woke up. Before him, the Empress was already sitting on the sofa with her legs curled up, watching the news. Other than some of Rinpoche's introductions, she obtained her knowledge of this world from the news. Rinpoche leaned against the wall and looked at the Empress, who was sitting on the sofa. There was a strange feeling in his heart. It was the feeling of a belated first love. Even though he was afraid of the Empress in the beginning and felt that she was dignified and indifferent, that feeling was getting lesser and lesser these days. Every time he saw the Empress, his heart would palpitate with excitement. Any man who was chosen by such a woman to be her husband and then retracted all the spikes on his body would probably not refuse. "I'm hungry." The Empress met his gaze and looked back. "Okay." Rinpoche smiled, turned around, and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Rinpoche first made porridge and then began to fry the eggs. These were all that was left at home. The vegetables that were bought when the Empress was still around had rotted away in the refrigerator. "There's a fire." The Empress's cold voice was heard. Rinpoche immediately turned his head and looked around. There were no signs of fire in the surroundings. "It's downstairs." Rinpoche then ran out of the kitchen. Sure enough, there was already black smoke drifting up from downstairs. Rinpoche didn't know if there was anyone downstairs. He hurriedly ran upstairs and called the fire department. At the same time, he looked down from the window. It was just below him on the 6th floor. Rinpoche also saw half a body sticking out of the window. It was a woman. "I'm calling the fire department," Rinpoche shouted. "Help, the door can't be opened and I can't run out. Please pass me a rope." The woman downstairs raised her head and pleaded. From her voice, she didn't sound old. He couldn't make out her appearance as her face was completely black from the smoke. Rinpoche turned his head and looked around. Where was the rope? "Your Majesty, can you do me a favor?" Rinpoche turned his head and asked the Empress. Even though he didn't know the person downstairs, he couldn't possibly let such a woman face the fire alone. It was just a small effort. If he could help, he would help. After all, he was a good person. The Empress's facial expression changed. The person downstairs wasn't an aboriginal. Furthermore, from her voice, it was a woman. However, since Rinpoche requested, she still nodded her head. "I'll trouble your Majesty to help me open the door." Rinpoche thanked her. He hurriedly ran to the corridor in his pajamas, opened the fire hydrant, took out the fire extinguisher, and ran to the 6th floor. The Empress followed closely behind him. At this moment, there was already someone on the 6th floor. Rinpoche didn't know if it was the person next door or the person downstairs. A middle-aged man was smashing the door lock with a hammer. "Let me do it." Rinpoche saw the situation and put the fire extinguisher aside. Originally, he thought that he could get the Empress to smash the door lock with a slap. However, he couldn't do that now that there was someone here. Fortunately, he had over 140 kilograms of strength. He felt that he should be slightly stronger than that middle-aged man. He grabbed the hammer and smashed it twice. The door handle, which was already on the verge of collapse, was smashed down. However, after smashing it down, he realized that the door still couldn't be opened. "There's someone in the house. Do you have a rope? I'll go down from the window and let her climb up," Rinpoche said to that middle-aged man. "Yes." After Rinpoche snatched the hammer away from that middle-aged man, he turned around and saw the Empress in red. Immediately, he couldn't take his eyes off her. Until the Empress's face started to turn frosty. That middle-aged man shivered. He didn't know why, but a feeling of fear arose in his heart. He subconsciously looked away. At this moment, after hearing Rinpoche's words, He immediately agreed and hurriedly ran downstairs to get the rope. After he left, a spotlessly white hand smacked the position of the door lock. With a bang, the chain immediately dented the surrounding iron, following which all the parts of the lock flew into the house. After the Empress finished smacking the door, she turned around and left. Ren Baqin was stunned for a moment. He stretched out his hand and pulled the door open. A gust of scorching hot smoke and flames immediately spurted out. The shoe cabinet at the door had already started to catch fire. Ren Baqin couldn't care less about anything else. He immediately turned on the fire extinguisher and started to extinguish the fire. That middle-aged man ran back with the rope and realized that the door was already open. He was immediately stunned, but he immediately picked up the fire extinguisher from the 6th floor and started to extinguish the fire. After using 2 cans of fire extinguisher, the fire in the living room was basically extinguished. Only the kitchen was still burning. A girl with a face full of soot ran out. She knelt on the ground and gasped for breath. "Ooh, I thought I was going to die just now." The girl cried loudly. At this moment, Ren Baqin estimated that she was only 17 or 18 years old. "It's all right as long as you're fine. The firefighters will be here soon," Ren Baqin casually said. Since she was fine, there was no need for him to stay any longer. When Ren Baqin returned, the Empress was already sitting on the sofa. She only shot a glance at Ren Baqin when he returned. Ren Baqin looked at the porridge. Fortunately, she was fine. He went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. His face was also covered in soot and streaks of black and white. While he was washing up and changing into a new set of clothes, the firefighters had already arrived. While Ren Baqin and the Empress were having their breakfast quietly, a group of people were studying how the security door became like this after putting out the fire downstairs. The area where the door handle was supposed to be had been smashed in, and the entire security door was dented. Such a door wouldn't become like this even if it was smashed with a sledgehammer, let alone an ordinary one-handed hammer. After Ren Baqin finished eating, he kept the bowls and chopsticks before taking out his phone to make a call. Nowadays, the Empress needed an identity card. Otherwise, it would be troublesome. "I want an identity, a real one, not a fake one," Ren Baqin said after the other party picked up the phone. "We don't do this kind of business." The person on the other side of the phone was the place where Ren Baqin bought guns twice. Ren Baqin really didn't want to trouble Qin Qing. Since the other party could privately run a firearms business in the country, he presumably had a wide network of contacts. An identity card shouldn't be a big problem. In any case, Ren Baqin didn't have any connections. Even if he had money, he didn't know who to give it to. He also didn't have the time to bribe someone. 200,000 yuan. You just need to tell me who to look for. After that, let him know first. The other party was silent for a while before replying, "All right." If he wanted a real identity card, he would definitely have to give the other party the Empress's photo and name. As for these people, even though they looked like intelligent people, Ren Baqin still couldn't trust them. He was afraid that there would be trouble in the future. The main thing was that the other party's business would make people wary. Chapter 171. An hour later, Ren Baqin received a text message. He dialed the number on the message and it was a middle-aged man. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Ren Baqin told him about the matter. The gist of it was that he had lost his identity document when he moved here from another place and became an unregistered resident. In fact, both parties were well aware of the truth of the matter. If that was really the case, there was no need to look for him. He could have done it directly at his original location. However, there was no need to say much. The other party did not ask much either. He only made an appointment and hung up the phone. When Ren Baqin made the call, he was not far away from the Empress. Seeing that she was looking up at him, he smiled and said, "An identity can reduce a lot of trouble. Moreover, don't you want to see more of this world? If you want to take a plane or go abroad, identification is a must. The identity management in this world is very strict. The internet is also very developed. It can be found out in an instant." The Empress nodded. She had too many things she did not understand about this world. However, there was someone around who understood these things. She just had to listen to his arrangements. "Your Majesty, let me take a photo for you," Rinpoche suddenly said with a smile. The Empress raised her head and was slightly puzzled. "What?" Rinpoche picked up his phone and casually took a picture of the room. He brought the phone to the Empress and said, "It's the same as what you see on TV. The picture can be preserved. I feel that this can preserve the most beautiful moment of your Majesty." The Empress looked at the picture on Rinpoche's phone and compared it with the picture of the corner that Rinpoche took just now. She asked curiously, "How is this done?" "It's just like how the human eye can see the scenery. In fact, it's the light that projects the scenery into the human eye, which is then turned into an image by the brain. The same principle applies to cell phones or cameras. Light is cast into the cell phone or camera and the image is left behind." The Empress frowned and pondered for a moment. Her face turned cold and said, "I don't understand. This thing won't suck my soul into it, right?" Rinpoche almost vomited blood when he heard this. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. He did not expect the Empress to be so cute. After spending a long time talking and using his cell phone to search for the principle of the camera, he finally convinced the Empress that this thing would not suck her soul into it and would only leave behind an image. At the same time, he took a picture of himself to make sure that there was no problem. After all, people will always change, and the things around them won't exist forever. Whether it's friends or others, taking pictures is to preserve the precious images in one's memory. Besides, it's necessary to take a photo to create an identity. After a long time, the Empress nodded her head slightly to show that she trusted him. This was already an extremely rare trust. After all, the Empress didn't understand such things at all. Rinpoche squatted down in front of the Empress and took a photo of the motionless Empress. He could see that she was a little nervous as her fingers were clenched together. After taking the photo, Rinpoche showed her the upper body of the Empress. She felt that there was nothing wrong with her body and finally felt relieved. "Your Majesty, say eggplant." Rinpoche ran to a nearby location and aimed his phone at the Empress, who was sitting on the sofa. All he got in return was a cold stare. Rinpoche looked at the image of a lady dressed in red with the sun shining on her body. Her face was as beautiful as a painting. Rinpoche became even more excited. He changed a few angles to capture the Empress. After that, he sat beside her and said, "Your Majesty, this will be able to preserve your most beautiful moment forever. Everyone in Dayo and the entire world can see your Majesty at this moment." "I've eaten the jade embryo, so I won't grow old," the Empress said coldly. Rinpoche still didn't know about the jade embryo. When Hongwu gave the jade embryo to the Empress, no one explained it to him. After hearing this sentence, he was immediately astonished. After asking around, he found out about the effects of the jade embryo. This was a treasure that everyone, from the head of state to the commoners, would go crazy for. It was a pity that this kind of treasure was extremely rare in that world. Otherwise, Hongwu wouldn't have given it to the Empress as a birthday gift and caused everyone to exclaim in admiration. Rinpoche looked at the photo of the Empress in his phone. He always wanted to take the most beautiful photo of the Empress, print it, and post it to the ends of the earth so that the whole world could see what the Empress of Dayo, the 7th most beautiful person in the world, looked like. For example, it would be pretty good to hang it on the top of the city wall. He just didn't know if anyone would find it disrespectful. At this moment, Rinpoche's thoughts were more or less showing off. Rinpoche looked at the time. It was about time to set off and reach the agreed location. He said to the Empress, "Your Majesty, let's help you with your identity first. After that, we'll take a stroll in the city." After changing his clothes, he came down from the sofa with a phone in his hand. It was prepared previously and only had his phone number saved in it. "Your Majesty, it's more convenient to contact each other if you get separated from each other." Rinpoche passed the phone to the Empress. The Empress had long been curious about this thing. After all, it was possible to hear the voices of people from far away through such a small device. If the army had such a device, it would be too convenient. How do I use this? The Empress raised her head and asked. She didn't understand anything about this world. While it was full of novelty, it also made her somewhat uncomfortable. It had been a long time since she felt so powerless. Renbaqian taught the Empress how to use the phone. At the same time, he demonstrated how to dial his own number. He placed the phone beside the Empress's ear and pressed the answer button. "Your Majesty." Renbaqian smiled warmly at the Empress, who was very close to him and could smell the fragrance on her body. After hearing the voice of the man in front of her and the voice that came from the phone, the Empress took the phone and fiddled with it a few times. She then repeated the operation that Renbaqian had just taught her. The Empress went out with a red dress. This time, she was wearing a long leather coat with mink fur at the collar. That cold and detached aura of hers became even more intense. It was already the middle of March. Even though it was still a little cold, the sunlight felt very comfortable. The streets in March were much livelier and brighter than in winter. After a harsh winter, everyone could feel the feeling of vitality. Everyone's spirit was much better than in winter. Many people had a relaxed look on their faces. The two of them arrived at the Civil Affairs Department. Renbaqian turned to the Empress and said, "Your Majesty, why don't you wait here for a while? I don't think you will like so many people inside." The Empress shook her head slightly and said, "I will go with you. I also want to see how you do things here." An hour later, the two of them walked out. Renbaqian had a temporary identity card in his hand. The name on it was Cheesy Xiao. Just now, when the Empress went in, the person who handled the identification was immediately stunned, as Renbaqian expected. As someone who dealt with all kinds of people all year round, how could he not see that Cheesy Xiao wasn't an ordinary person? But how could such a person be an unregistered resident? Fortunately, everything was settled smoothly in the end. Now, the Empress could be considered to have settled down on Earth. Chapter 172. Along with the whistling sound, Renbaqian and the Empress felt the pressure from the accelerating plane. The scenery outside the window also proved this point. Looking down through the window, they could see that everything on the ground was getting smaller and smaller until everything on the ground was the size of an ant. The plane began to stabilize, and after a while, it rose again. "Cheesy Xiao, are you all right?" Renbaqian looked at Cheesy Xiao, who was sitting by the window, and asked. He could see that she was a little nervous. On land, she was the 7th most powerful expert in the world, but in the sky, she felt that everything was out of her control. At this height, even with her skills, she would definitely die if she fell. "Won't I fall?" The Empress frowned as she looked out of the window. "It's safer than driving. There won't be any problems," Renbaqian comforted her softly. "Pa!" A soft sound was heard. While Renbaqian was still looking for the source of the sound, he saw that the armrest between them had actually been crushed by the Empress and turned into a pile of fragments. Many people would be nervous during their first time in the air. However, the Empress only used a little more strength, and the current situation became like this. Looking at this, Renbaqian was considering whether to make a false accusation that the quality of the armrest was too poor. Seeing that the Empress was still nervous, Renbaqian stretched out his hand and said, "You can hold my hand for a while, but don't crush it." This wasn't a joke, it was the truth. How could his hand not be as hard as the armrest? If his hand was crushed, he would probably have to amputate it. The Empress glanced at him, turned around, and continued to look out of the window. Her tightly clenched hand finally loosened, and the fragments fell to the ground. At this moment, both of them were on a plane flying to Yazhou, 3YA. Previously, Renbaqian asked, "Your Majesty, do you want to see the sea?" A few hours later, both of them were sitting here. In this season, they still had to go to Yazhou to see the sea. The seaside in the north could freeze people to death, and there was nothing much to see in the cold weather. Renbaqian wanted to know if the Empress would wear a swimsuit, but this was just a thought. If he were to raise this thought, he would probably be slapped to death. The last time he showed her how to wear a bra, his phone was destroyed. When the plane flew above the clouds, the Empress's eyes widened a little. At this moment, the clouds were like floating continents that reflected the sunlight. It was extremely spectacular and beautiful. A moment later, when the air stewardess passed by, Rinpoche called out to her. He pointed at the armrest with an innocent look on his face and said, "The quality of your armrest is too poor. It breaks when I pinch it." Looking at the two people in front of her, she had an impression of the woman in the red dress. She was too beautiful, full of heroic spirit, and her aura was even more powerful. When she looked at her, she actually felt inferior. Just now in the rear cabin, she had even discussed with the other air stewardesses, wondering what kind of family she came from. She had just heard the first half of Rinpoche's sentence, and she was still thinking about what he meant. However, when the stewardess saw the shattered armrest of the seat, she was clearly surprised. She knew the quality of the seat armrest. How could it be broken with just a pinch? But the truth was right before their eyes. "I'm sorry, sir and this lady." The flight attendant apologized first. Regardless of whether she believed it or not, the armrest was indeed broken. Furthermore, it couldn't have been broken by human hands. It could only be that there was a problem with the armrest that wasn't discovered beforehand. She also didn't mention anything about compensation. After all, this incident had never happened before. She also didn't know how to deal with it. She had to ask the company after the plane landed. However, she assumed that the company wouldn't ask for compensation. After all, the seat armrest on the plane was broken with just a pinch. This was a huge black mark. As long as the other party didn't tell anyone about this incident, the company would be thankful. "It's all right, I'm just informing you to check more next time." Rinpoche smiled politely. After waiting for the stupefied flight attendant to leave, Rinpoche laughed to himself. In the past, he had never made such a false accusation. These days, he had changed more and more. "Is this thing very expensive?" The Empress turned around and asked Rinpoche after getting tired of looking at the scenery of the clouds. The plane had really broadened her horizons. Previously, she never thought that there would be a time where she could fly above the clouds. According to the legends of Great Xia, that was the residence of the immortals. However, there weren't any immortals in this world. It seemed that it wasn't difficult to fly above the clouds. The monthly salary of the most ordinary citizen can probably afford to fly twice, right? It shouldn't be considered expensive. If it's a long-distance trip, the speed is very fast. It will only take 6 hours to travel more than 3,000 kilometers. The Empress calculated in her heart. The distance from Lan City to Great Xia was about 3,000 kilometers. It would take half a month for a horse carriage to travel and about 4 days for a cavalryman to travel at top speed. In this world, it would probably take less than 4 hours to reach Great Xia. This was the power of technology in this world. This was what Dayo lacked, a power that far surpassed that of the Yun Nation, the Qin Nation, and Great Xia. When the plane arrived in Yenzhou, it was already 10 p.m. Rinpoche felt the hot weather the moment he got off the plane. He took his and the Empress's coats and left the airport. Although it was already late at night, the outside was still brightly lit. Furthermore, the fresh air and the holiday atmosphere made people feel relaxed. They took a taxi to the Sea Charm Hotel, which they had previously booked. It was a luxurious sea-view room with 2 bedrooms and 1 living room. After putting down his things, Rinpoche went to the window of the living room. From here, he could hear the sound of the waves and smell the sea. He had long wanted to come here. The Empress came to Rinpoche's side. Although she couldn't see anything, she could still hear the sound of the waves. To her, the sea was something that she had only seen in books. There were only a few descriptions of it. Her deepest impression of the sea was that it could be used to produce salt. If Dayo had a sea, they wouldn't have to worry about salt. Subsequently, both of them ordered some dinner before returning to their respective rooms to rest. The next day, Rinpoche woke up early and stood in front of the window to look at the blue sky and white clouds outside. The bright and beautiful weather put him in a good mood. At this time of the day, it was indeed much more comfortable here than in the north. At this moment, standing here and looking outside, there were already people who had woken up early and were taking a stroll on the beach. When he came out of the room, the Empress was already sitting on the sofa and switching on the television. These days, she would wake up early to watch the morning news. Every day, she would learn a lot of things from it. However, she rarely asked Rinpochen. Most of the things were kept in her heart and would only be asked when she felt it was necessary. Like a sponge, she slowly understood the knowledge of this world. Rinpochen felt that if she really wanted to understand more, it would be better for her to learn the language of this world and use the internet to understand more. It was much more efficient than watching the television. After finishing breakfast, Rinpochen changed his clothes and went out for a stroll with the Empress. The environment of the hotel was pretty good. The greenery in the courtyard was very good, and there was even a swimming pool. The people coming and going were all relaxed tourists. After leaving the hotel and turning a corner, a white beach and azure sea appeared in front of them. Some children were running and playing on the sea. Chapter 173. Rinpochen and the Empress stepped barefoot on the beach and felt the texture of the fine sand beneath their feet. The sound of the waves rang in their ears. Streaks of white lines surged from afar, slapped on the beach, and slowly retreated. What do you think of this place? At this moment, Rinpochen even omitted his name. The two of them had already agreed to address each other by name when they were outside. If he were to call her Chi Zixiao, it would be too distant. If he were to call her Zixiao, Rinpochen couldn't bring himself to say it. At the end of the day, he was just an ordinary young man who had never been in love before, and he was a bit of a loner. Even though he had changed a lot these days, he was still somewhat restrained. The Empress turned her head and looked at the azure sea. Then, she looked at the children running around and the wanderers with relaxed smiles on their faces. She said, "It's very peaceful. For ordinary people, this kind of life is very good." Rinpochen nodded. It was a pity that the people around him were not ordinary people. So the sea is like this. I've thought about it many times in the past, but I can't think of anything, the Empress said again. On Earth, even a child could learn what the ocean looked like through various channels. However, in that world, even the Empress found it hard to imagine things that she had never encountered before. Of course, that world also had its merits. For example, martial techniques, cultivation methods, lifespan extension, and all kinds of treasures were hard to imagine on Earth. In general, Earth was more suitable for ordinary people to live a stable life. Do you want to try? Rinpochen said to the Empress. He took a few steps toward the sea, allowing the seawater to splash on his feet and calves. The Empress hesitated for a moment before taking a few steps forward. She lowered her head and looked at the seawater that was splashing up and submerging her feet. Do you want to take a picture? Rinpochen looked at the Empress, took out his phone, and placed it in front of him. The Empress didn't pay attention to him. He minded his own business and took a few pictures of her silhouette. Then he put away his phone. The two of them stood on the beach for a while, then slowly walked back. Hey, be careful. Suddenly, a shout came from the side. Rinpochen turned his head and saw a ball flying in his direction. Furthermore, it was heading straight for the Empress. Not far from him were 6 young foreigners in shorts and t-shirts, with a net in the middle. Quite a few of them had smiles on their faces, but it was unknown if they were doing it on purpose or not. Looking at their expressions, it was very likely that they were doing this on purpose. This was not necessarily malicious. Sometimes, they just wanted to see what that person's face looked like. If they hit someone and then ran up to apologize and say a few words, this was considered a small game for them. This kind of thing is not rare. However, the other party had obviously chosen the wrong target this time. The Empress didn't move at all. She raised her hand and gently swatted the incoming volleyball as if she was swatting a fly. At a speed that was much faster than when it came, the ball whizzed back like a cannonball. Boom! A young foreign man who was facing this side was sent flying into the air after his face came into close contact with the volleyball. The young man fell backward, and a line of blood spurted out from his raised face. Even from afar, Rinpochen could feel the pain. I have to say, you guys brought this upon yourselves. The Empress had no intention of stopping at all. Rinpochen quickened his pace and followed beside her. As for those foreigners, he couldn't be bothered. However, he didn't want to bother about them. Instead, they recklessly ran over and blocked their way. The golden-haired, muscular young man in the lead said in clumsy Mandarin, "You guys hit my friend, you have to apologize to him." The four of them were taller than the two of them, and they were completely looking at the Empress when they said that. When they blocked their way, they were very surprised to see the Empress's face. She was really too stunning. Rinpoche looked at these reckless people and shook his head. Just now, she only used one hand to gently swat the volleyball back. Didn't you see that? You actually dared to come here? Also, did the Empress use the word, apologize? Get lost. The Empress didn't care about what they said and only threw out these words coldly. You guys are the ones who threw the ball over. Rinpoche took a step forward and said, Did you guys think that you were hit by a lady? The few of them looked at each other. One of them looked at the Empress and insisted, It was an accident just now, you have to apologize to my friend. The Empress turned her head and looked at Rinpoche. Her expression was indifferent, but her eyes revealed an inquisitive look. Rinpoche subconsciously felt that she wasn't asking him what to do, but whether he could beat her to death. He didn't know why, but he felt that way. Rinpoche didn't know what to say at this moment. However, before he said anything, the Empress had already made her decision. Everyone still didn't know what happened. The young man who spoke just now was immediately sent flying and directly knocked down the person behind him. Rinpoche didn't even notice how she made her move. He only felt that the Empress might have kicked him just now from the movement of her skirt. After the two of them left, Rinpoche could still hear the panicked shouts of the few young people behind him. After all, no one saw the stunning lady suddenly make a move, or rather, a kick. They completely didn't know what happened. Zixiao, it's better not to make a move here. After all, your identity is special and you can't be discovered by others. Rinpoche leaned close to the Empress's ear and suddenly said. The sudden address made the Empress stop in her tracks. She turned her head and looked at him. It doesn't matter if they are dead or alive. The key is that if you do that, you will attract the attention of the nation or some people. This is a dangerous thing for you. Even if you aren't afraid, there will still be a lot of trouble. Rinpoche felt a little apprehensive. Just now, he had impulsively called out her name. He didn't know if the Empress would have any reaction. The Empress stared at his face with a pair of cool eyes. After a while, she shifted her gaze away and continued to walk forward. However, her ears were slightly red. Rinpoche directly called her name, causing her heart to beat faster in a peculiar manner. Once again, she was at a loss as to what to do. Suddenly, she didn't know what to say. Even though she had already chosen this person to be her husband, and she had heard a lot of things from him before. Every time she had this kind of feeling, she would feel a little flustered in her heart. As for the other words, she completely didn't hear them clearly. Only God knew what he said. It was just that the words Zishuan kept reverberating in her ears. Rinpoche had no choice but to follow her again. What he said just now was enough. From the looks of it, the Empress was already very well controlled in this world. In fact, the reason why he said that was because those people just now weren't dangerous. If they could really pose a threat, Rinpoche wouldn't be so pedantic as to not make a move. After all, he had more than one life on his hands. He just didn't want the Empress to expose her uniqueness. He enjoyed the warm life with the Empress on Earth very much and didn't want it to be interrupted. Chapter 174. After leaving the beach, Rinpoche rented a car. Then he went to a supermarket and bought a lot of ingredients for barbecuing and loaded them into the car. Then he drove the Empress on the road aimlessly. The wind blew into the car and messed up the Empress's hair. From time to time, it would brush against Rinpoche's face. The sun, the coast, the road, and aimless travel. Rinpoche felt that this was his dream life. He turned on the multimedia in the car and pressed a few buttons. Immediately, cheerful and lively music started playing in the car. Wear a floral shirt with a ukulele. Otherwise, you will look like a gangster brother. Wear a suit with a female companion. Otherwise, you will look like a valet. He tapped the steering wheel with one hand and turned to look at the Empress from time to time. When will Deo become like this? The Empress asked after thinking for a long time. She could feel the joy and satisfaction of everyone here, which was more obvious than in the fast-paced cities. Technology and education are the foundation of everything. The development of society can't be separated from these. Although there are rich and poor people here. The rich are as rich as a country, and the poor have difficulty eating. But most ordinary people can meet their basic material needs. They can do this because they have more abundant materials and low prices. The advancement of technology is the prerequisite for achieving these things. For technology to advance, it doesn't require one or two people, but a majority of people to receive education. Commoners don't just farm and hunt, but also contribute to the country. For example, in this world, children start studying at the age of 8 until they are 16 or 17. After high school, they go to university, master's, and doctorate. The minimum is 9 years, the majority 16 years, and a few even study for more than 20 years. This kind of education allows everyone to have a certain understanding of the world. Every year, there are about 7 million people who graduate from university after 16 years of study. After these people finish their studies, they influence all aspects of society, including the birth of technology. The Empress was surprised again when she heard the number. Deo had a total population of less than 40 million, and there were 7 million people who completed their 16 years of study here every year. If she hadn't come to this world, it would be hard to believe such a thing. However, after coming to this world twice, she felt that it wasn't a lie. The people around her couldn't possibly lie to her about this. Furthermore, from what he had seen in the past few days, the people of this world were very weak and couldn't be compared to the Aboriginals. However, in terms of speech and perception, they were much better than the Aboriginals. Zixiao, forgive me for speaking bluntly, but Deo basically doesn't have any basic education. It's still at the primitive stage of farming and hunting. Only a small number of imperial court officials were educated. These people might do well in their positions, such as in the 6 ministries or other positions, but it was very difficult for them to promote scientific and technological progress in a few decades or even centuries. The ratio of ordinary people becoming geniuses through learning might not be high, but with enough people, a sufficient number of geniuses could grow. Together, these people could change a country or even a world. The most important thing here was that they had learned and gained knowledge. We have 3 sayings here: knowledge changes fate, knowledge creates wealth, and knowledge is power. A human strength was 100 or 1,000 pounds, but a machine's strength could be 100 or 1,000 times stronger. Something that required 10 or even 100 people to do could be easily done by a machine. As long as there was knowledge, there would be enough power. For example, this car. Ren Baqian patted the steering wheel. For example, the plane can fly people in the sky, and the rocket can even send people beyond Earth. These are things that can't be done by human power. What do you learn? The Empress asked. There are many things that are all-inclusive. The content of learning before high school is the same, basic education. It includes mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, language, and history. After high school, it is up to each person to choose the direction of study. Some study physics and chemistry and study the rules of this world, as well as the various changes in the composition of matter. Those who studied medicine would become doctors and treat patients after their studies. There were those who studied agriculture. After learning, they would teach others how to grow crops with higher yields and research on crops with higher yields. Some study machinery and design and manufacture machines that can replace human power. The work of 10 or 100 people can be done by a machine. For example, cars, planes, and other things are the same. Some study music and play all kinds of inspiring music, just like the song that is playing now. Some study construction and study how to build various kinds of buildings in various terrains. You have seen those tall buildings. There are even people who study foreign languages, cooking, repair, and so on. There are also many people who choose to become teachers after learning and teach students what they have learned. Therefore, There is no lack of teachers here. Renbachen parked his car by the roadside and introduced proudly. Here, the brain is the most powerful force. Knowledge can be found everywhere, but it is also the most valuable. Of course, he selectively filtered out some things. For example, the Empress might find it hard to understand why they had to learn how to run, jump, and long jump. Economics and politics were also difficult to understand. The Empress listened to Renbachen and looked into the distance. She realized that what Renbachen said was the biggest difference between this world and Dayo. Everyone was like a dragon. So, what do you want to do? The Empress looked at Renbachen and asked. Her eyes were no longer cold, but had a tinge of expectation. First, we will deal with the iron mine and well salt at Mount Damo. After that, we will start with education. The Aboriginals are very powerful, but the power of the brain is more powerful than the strength of the body, Renbachen replied. He had already considered this matter. There is one more thing, the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation, Renbachen continued. In this world, China alone has 56 ethnic groups with different habits and customs. However, these 56 ethnic groups are all integrated together and are part of this nation. They are working hard in the same direction and making contributions to this nation. The remnant citizens of the Hao Nation have been under Dayo's governance for 70 years, but they have never integrated. In fact, they can do many things. The Aboriginals are good at fighting, but not at farming, business, manufacturing, etc. However, these remnant citizens of the Hao Nation can make up for the deficiencies of the Aboriginals. Both sides do not necessarily have to oppose each other, but can cooperate. Perhaps in your eyes, these people are very weak, and can even be erased with a command from you. They are only kept alive because of the original agreement. However, they can also become stronger, Renbachen continued. Although he had never seen the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation, the Aboriginals and the remnant citizens were still in a state of complete opposition after the Hao Nation had been destroyed for so long. They even had to be guarded by the army to prevent them from playing tricks or even rebelling. This was a complete waste. It was a waste of military strength and also a waste of nearly 20 million people. If these people could be liberated, how many things could they do? They will rebel even now. They are not obedient, the Empress immediately said. They are like caged birds, unable to see any future. In the past 70 years, you have not integrated them, which is why they are so restless. However, it can't always be like this. If we conquer the Yun Nation, the Chen Nation, or even Great Xia, do we have to encircle them in a designated location and constantly guard against their rebellions? Renbachen said bluntly. I have never thought of conquering them, and the late emperor also did not have this intention. Otherwise, the Yun Nation would have been destroyed decades ago. The Aboriginals lack manpower. Many of them are still living in the mountains and are not enough to control such a large territory, the Empress said. Therefore, it is really a waste for those people to be there. If they can be used, the strength of Dayo will increase a lot, even if not double, and the lives of the people will be better than now. Didn't he let them manage themselves now? Why not let them do more things? I have mentioned this matter to Her Majesty before. We can completely integrate them into Dayo as long as we pull out a few disloyal people. Most of the commoners don't have many thoughts. As long as they can live and work in peace and see hope, it will be fine. As long as they strengthen their recognition of Dayo, they will not have disloyal thoughts. Even if they have disloyal thoughts, there won't be too many people following them and they won't cause too much trouble. If Her Majesty is worried, you can do it bit by bit and slowly integrate them into Dayo. As long as the Aboriginals control some key places, they won't be able to cause any trouble. Decades ago, the entire Hao Nation was conquered. What else do these people have to worry about now? The imperial court will not agree. Renbachen could imagine that there would be a lot of resistance to this matter. We can do it bit by bit and let a small portion of the Hao Nation's remnant citizens come out. Then we will see what kind of changes will occur. A few 100,000 people won't cause much of an impact. Instead, they might see some changes. Do you have any ideas? The Empress asked. Chapter 175. Both of them sat in the car and listened to a cheerful tune, but they were talking about serious issues. After talking for a long time, both of them fell silent again. The Empress was thinking about Rinpoche's words and the future of Daeyo. Previously, she didn't feel anything when she was in Daeyo. Even though there was a gap between Daeyo and the Yun Nation and the Chen Nation, it wasn't that huge. However, in this world, she really felt this way. The only thing that the Aboriginals could be proud of was their strong individual strength. According to Rinpoche, the level of civilization was used to represent the two worlds. The difference in civilization between the two worlds was too big. Rinpoche put his hands behind his head and occasionally looked at the side of the Empress's face before looking at the blue sky and white clouds outside. After a long time, Rinpoche said, "Shall we roast the meat here? I will go down and prepare first." This was near a beach. The quality of the sand wasn't very good, and there were many reefs around. However, it had a different flavor compared to the calm beach. Rinpoche first found a good place to start a fire with the stove and charcoal. Then, he went back to the car to get the marinated meat. After a while, the Empress and Rinpoche sat on the beach with the sea beside them. Each of them sat on a small stool. It couldn't be compared to those high-end restaurants, but it was very comfortable. From time to time, Rinpoche placed the roasted meat on a plate and placed it beside the Empress. No matter how high-end that kind of place is, it can't compare to the palace. The life of ordinary people is more interesting. Ordinary people are bragging, but Your Majesty, you are experiencing life. Rinpoche chattered from time to time and didn't care whether the Empress replied or not. After roasting the meat, the Empress drank a whole bottle of white wine, but her eyes were still clear. Do you know that the Earth is round? Earth is just a planet in this boundless universe. There are countless planets like Earth. There are all kinds of intelligent life on it, such as the Autobots, Decepticons, Ultraman, and Super Scions. Rinpoche began to ramble after drinking half a bottle of white wine. In order to increase his persuasiveness, Rinpoche specially used his cell phone to find a video of Transformers for the Empress to watch. Looking at the battle between the giant transformable robot and the humans, the Empress was stunned. The Empress stared at the screen and subconsciously thought about what she would do if she encountered such an enemy. Although the other party was huge, had a steel body, and had all kinds of weapons, it wouldn't be a problem for her. However, it was unknown how many ordinary Aboriginals it would take to kill him. Rinpoche watched as the Empress pondered seriously. He found it more and more interesting, and the smile on his face widened. The Empress happened to raise her head and saw the smile on his face. Very quickly, she realized that this was the movie that Rinpoche had mentioned before. Her face immediately turned cold. "You lied to me." Rinpoche dragged his voice as he drew a parabola in the air and fell into the water with a splash. Rinpoche was dumbfounded the moment he entered the water. The water was so deep that he couldn't even reach the bottom. Furthermore, he didn't know how to swim. Rinpoche felt that seawater kept pouring into his mouth. His body had no foothold, and he struggled desperately. When the Empress saw Rinpoche struggling in the water, she frowned. This guy actually didn't know how to swim. A red shadow flashed across the surface of the water like lightning, grabbed Rinpoche, who was struggling in the water, and slapped the surface of the water with the other hand. The surface of the water first pressed down, and then, like an explosion, a huge water column shot up. The Empress used this force to bounce back to the shore and threw Rinpoche on the beach. Rinpoche vomited seawater for a long time, and even vomited half of his dinner. Following which, he rolled to the side and lay on the beach, gasping for breath. Hee-hee-ha. Rinpoche lay on the beach and suddenly laughed. He was overjoyed. Thinking of how audacious he was to actually use a transformer to bluff the Empress, he really admired himself. As for the Empress's reaction, even though she threw him into the water in a fit of anger, she still fished him out. It seemed like she wasn't really angry. This seemed to be how lovers should interact with each other, right? Even though it was a little too violent. The Empress looked coldly at this fool. Even though she didn't enter the water just now, her body was still quite wet. Many parts of her clothes were directly stuck to her body. After Rinpoche had enough of lying on the beach, he became much more clear-headed. He returned to the sea to wash off most of the sand on his body. Then he wrung out his clothes until they were half dry. Only then did he return to the car, drenched in water. The Empress was already in the car. He drove the car back to the hotel in the middle of the night. Just like that, the two of them stayed in Yenzhou for 2 days. On the second day, they just strolled around and shopped. They bought a few dresses for the Empress and changed their clothes. Following which, they took a plane back to Shin City. After placing all the big and small bags into the house, the Empress sat on the sofa with a bag of Maltese in her hand. They were bought in Yenzhou, and unexpectedly, the Empress loved them. Even with the Empress's strength, Rinpoche wondered if she would have a toothache if she ate so much sweet food. If the Empress really had a toothache, it wouldn't be easy to find a dentist for her in the future. The two of them had only been back for 10 minutes when they heard a knock on the door. Rinpoche immediately opened the door. Outside was a middle-aged couple with a 17 or 18-year-old girl. The girl was rather delicate and pretty. "Hello, sorry to disturb you. I'm from downstairs. Thank you so much for the past few days." The middle-aged man reached out to grab Rinpoche's hand and said, "Thank you. That day, I came up to look for you to thank you, but there was no one at home. Just now, I heard some sounds from upstairs and guessed that you were back. Hence, I came up to take a look." The girl was also very polite. The middle-aged woman also couldn't help but express her gratitude. If it wasn't for Rinpoche that day, her daughter wouldn't have been able to escape. In the end, anything could have happened. Even if she survived, it would have been a cruel thing for such a girl if she had been burned. They were sincerely grateful to Rinpoche. "It's nothing much. It's the people upstairs and downstairs. If I can help them, I will." Rinpoche smiled and waved his hand. "I would like to treat you to a meal to express my gratitude. Is that okay?" "It's just a simple meal," the middle-aged man invited him. "Forget about the meal, it's just a piece of cake." Rinpoche waved his hand. He wasn't interested in eating. Moreover, the Empress was still in the house. After spending a long time sending the family of 3 off, Rinpoche closed the door and sighed. This gratitude after saving someone was more troublesome than the act of saving someone. At night, he and the Empress watched a movie. It was Stephen Chow's Haunted Night. It was considered a classic horror movie. Rinpoche wanted to see if the Empress would be afraid. The result was just as he expected. The Empress finished watching the movie while eating popcorn without batting an eyelid. Chapter 176. In the cold and quiet Yangshin Palace Hall, 2 silhouettes suddenly appeared out of thin air. Rinpoche was holding a huge cardboard box and a small bag in his hands. After taking a good look at the surroundings, he lowered his head and looked at the Empress's hands. It was empty. "It was in my hands just now, but it disappeared in an instant," the Empress said as she looked at her left hand. After the second medicinal bath, Rinpoche's current strength was about 150 kilograms. The box in his hands and the Empress's strength were about the same. He originally wanted to see if the Empress could bring some with her, but it was proven that it was impossible. The items had disappeared. He didn't know if they were left on Earth or disappeared somewhere during the transmigration. "Your Majesty!" Qing Yuan and Hong Luan's voices sounded behind them. The Empress retracted her hand as if she had been electrocuted. "What time is it now?" the Empress turned around and asked. "Your Majesty, it's midnight." The two of them walked to the Empress and said after bowing. From the looks of it, the two of them had been guarding the Empress since she left. It was between 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock in the morning, which was exactly midnight. "Did anything happen in the palace?" the Empress asked again. "Everything is safe. The two of you can leave first," the Empress waved her hand. After the two of them left, she looked at the box in Rinpoche's hands and asked, "What's that?" Rinpoche asked someone to lock the box in his room before the two of them returned. She didn't have the time to ask. "It's a device that uses sunlight to melt steel. It's for demonstration purposes." I'm going to make glass and mirrors and a bigger piece of equipment to melt Mount Damo bit by bit. I thought that there might be some criticism if I build a factory to make glass, so I prepared this. I'm sure the others won't have anything to say about it, Rinpoche said as he patted the box. This was a demonstration of the solar furnace as well as his ability. He was well aware of his current situation. Feng Ho's attitude at the throne room and Tao Jiyuan's attitude at the start were enough to tell him a lot about his current situation. Even if he put himself in his shoes, he would come to the same conclusion. Therefore, he wanted to show some things to others. Once his ability was recognized by everyone, it would be much more convenient for him to do various things in the future. After all, he didn't like to be doubted. The Empress nodded her head, turned around, and returned to the couch. Let me know when you're ready tomorrow. I'll let Second Elder and a few others watch. In that case, I shall return first. Rinpoche carried the box and walked out carefully. When he was outside, he found 2 guards to help him send it back to Pingle Park. After returning to Pingle Park, Rinpoche first practiced Rui visualization before falling asleep on his bed. The next morning, when Rinpoche saw that the sun was already up, he instructed the imperial bodyguards to move the box to an open space in Pingle Park. In any case, the demonstration only needed an open space that didn't block the sun. Rinpoche opened the box and revealed a metal plate that was shaped like a pot lid. It was about 1 meter in diameter and had a grid on it. There were 2 other boxes in the box, and inside them were neatly arranged small lenses. It was said that there were 2,000 yuan in total. It had to be said that this job was quite troublesome. The clumsy Aboriginal guards couldn't help much, and he was afraid that they would destroy the metal plate if they used too much force. As such, he had no choice but to do it himself. It took him more than 2 hours to install the lenses, and his arms were sore. The 2 guards didn't leave either. They watched Rinpoche from afar and were curious about what he was doing. Occasionally, when they saw those small lenses, they subconsciously felt that they were very precious. Come, help me hold this, Rinpoche said to the 2 guards and went to find a tree branch. Point this toward the sun at this angle, Rinpoche instructed the guard. The disc was sparkling like a treasure, and the other guards subconsciously wanted to get closer to take a look. Don't get close, stand to the side. Rinpoche was shocked by the guard's action. The focal point of the reflection of the sunlight from this disc could directly melt steel, let alone a person. Alright, hold it and don't move. Rinpoche instructed the guard to stand properly while he extended the tree branch to a position that was 1.5 meters away from the center of the disc. When the tree branch reached the focal point, it instantly emitted smoke and then caught on fire. This scene caused the 2 guards to stare blankly. What kind of treasure was this round plate? Rinpoche went back to his room and found a small copper ring. He put it on the tree branch and extended it toward the focal point. The tree branch instantly ignited, and in less than 7 or 8 seconds, the copper ring began to melt. Finally, only half of it remained on the ground. The sun in this world was slightly bigger and hotter than on Earth. As a result, the speed at which the metal melted was faster. Deputy Prefect, what kind of treasure is this? The 2 guards were speechless and finally couldn't help but ask. Rinpoche smiled and didn't answer. He said, Go and inform Her Majesty. Forget it, I will go myself. He asked someone to put the disc back into the box and placed it in the house. Then he excitedly ran to Yangshin Palace Hall to look for the Empress. Your Majesty, I am done. I have tried it just now and there are no problems, Rinpoche said with a smile on his face. Oh, I would like to see what exactly you have made. However, there is no hurry. I will get someone to inform Second Elder, Tu Wan, and the others. You can accompany me for my meal first, the Empress said softly. After the Empress finished speaking, she asked Hong Luan to get the Imperial Guards to inform Second Elder, Minister of Revenue Tu Wan, Minister of Imperial Treasurer Gu Yu, Minister of Works Tong Jinye, and Minister of Ordnance Feng Ho. Your Majesty, we need mirrors to make this kind of solar furnace. I feel that we can build a glass factory in the name of the palace. The glass and mirrors produced can be circulated in the market or sold to the rich people in other countries. I believe that they will be willing to pay a high price. Then, we can use this money to purchase goods and transport them back to our country. In the name of the palace? The empress didn't have much of a concept of making money. Yes, the palace will send people to do it. The palace will open its own shops to sell the products and form its own caravans to transport the products to other countries. Then, we will use the money earned from the sales to purchase goods and sell them back to our country at a slightly higher price. This will not only benefit the commoners and make them feel grateful to Your Majesty, but also ensure the financial resources of the palace. At the same time, it will be completely controlled by the palace. This will also prevent a lot of things from happening, such as other people interfering, Rinpoche explained. If you put it this way, it is feasible. The empress nodded her head and said, "You want to form a caravan?" the empress asked. Yes, it is imperative. After all, by transporting goods from one place to another and selling them, the profits are huge. It can completely replenish the national treasury when needed. For example, if the cost of making a mirror is half a tael of silver, it can be sold for 5 taels of silver in our country. However, when transported to other countries, it can be sold for 15 taels of silver. This money will flow into our country from abroad. This kind of trade will make our country rich. All along, they have been selling their goods to us. Even though they are able to replenish the various goods that Dayo lacks, if this continues, Dayo's wealth will continue to flow out. Dayo's wealth will be used to support the nobles of other countries. By forming a caravan, we can form a balance in this kind of trade flow. At the same time, we can also send news from other countries back to our country through these caravans. Rinpoche simply explained the economic knowledge that everyone on Earth knew. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.